Your alternative talk radio contact. The Planet. KGRAradio.com.
With infinite complacence, people went to and fro over the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design, man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space.
Welcome to another episode of Into the Fray, leering at you from the woodline. Visit the mothership at intothefrayradio.com. There you can find all the episodes, the blog posts, ITF gear, and sign up for the free guest newsletter. The weekly show is, of course, always free and available in all podcatchers, but if you'd like to support the show, and why wouldn't you, go to the website and click Become an Insider, which in turn gets you extra content each and every month. And by the way, if you would be so kind as to leave a rating and review in your listening platform of choice, Cosmic Karma shall be yours. Be part of the discussion by joining the interactive ITF Facebook group, follow on Twitter at ITF_radio and Instagram. If you have an experience that you'd like to share, email Shannon at intothefrayradio.com. Thanks so much for listening. Now, if you would be so kind, buckle up your safety belts. Put that tray table in the upright position. Liftoff is upon us.
So on this edition of Into the Fray, I have back on with me Daniel Antal. And if you will recall, he was on episode 43. That was quite a while ago. So international cryptids, we talked about Orang Pendek, Yeti, and more. And of course, this time we're going to talk the Yeti again. We'll touch on Orang Pendek, Orangadong, and the rock apes of Vietnam, which I actually find fascinating myself. So for you, Dan, and if anyone hasn't listened to episode 43, will you give a little background on yourself and why you do this work?
Well, basically, I've had an interest in cryptids since the late 70s, since I was a kid, right? And I also grew up in the Pacific Northwest, in British Columbia. So yeah, it's hard not to be exposed to Bigfoot, Yetis, lake monsters, sea serpents, and so on. So I've had a keen interest in it for decades, actually.
And I think one of the questions that got asked a couple of times, and I didn't really need to send it to you because it would come up, of course, anyway, but people wanted to know, have you had your own sighting?
Well, I saw something back in 2011, basically at the place called the Lake of Seven Peaks, which is considered the home of the Orang Pendek. And I saw something there. Actually, the whole team saw something in a gully moving around. And and for some bizarre reason, I didn't bother to take out my camera because I was pretty sure it was a bear. But then afterwards, discussing it with my guides, we realized, it could have actually been an Orang Pendek. Mm. And the interesting thing is, this encounter, the place where I saw it in 2011, was virtually the same place where there was a well-known, well-publicized sighting in 2009.
Really?
Yeah, same place. And I've discussed this with other researchers, actually discussed this with a researcher who was actually there in 2009. Yeah, it was basically the same vicinity. It was actually near the western shores of the lake, which is kind of a commercial area where a lot of kids camp out. And we had been trekking maybe just 30, 40 minutes from that area when we saw something moving around in a gully just below us, about 20, 25 yards down.
And what was that sighting in 2009 like for those people?
Well, the sighting in 2009, it's been well publicized. I think it was a British expedition, and the leader of that expedition was an Indonesian researcher, sadly, who passed away a few years ago. What happened there, he was at the same campsite. He decided to go for a stroll. Okay, so he went for a little stroll on this well-marked trail, probably went for maybe 10, 15 minutes, and then he saw this orang pendek sitting on a stump or a log. So he starts panicking, tries to go for his camera, he fumbles his camera, pulls it out too late, the thing just splits off into the jungle.
Mm.
And the interesting thing is, though, he actually made a drawing, and this drawing, it's appeared a few times on the internet. I actually have it. So he actually made a drawing of the creature, and it's quite fascinating. I could probably send it to you after the show if you're interested.
That would be great. Yeah, and I should mention straight out of the gate, I've got it open on my other screen, is hominid-hunter.blogspot.com is your web address there. And you document everything. You've got all the pictures up there of all of your expeditions, which we're going to touch on. But you've got some really fascinating photos up there on your blog.
Yeah, unfortunately, I messed it up because I was playing around with the blog, and I ended up deleting most of the photos.
Oh,
so a lot of the older... Yeah, so a lot of the older stuff, from about 3 or 4 years ago, there's no photos there. The text is there, but the photos disappeared. So so I'm kind of sad about that. But nowadays, I'm kind of more focusing on the YouTube channel.
Mm-hmm.
I think just in terms of the stats, there's like way more people looking at the YouTube channel than they're actually looking at the blog. So I kind of be focused on the YouTube. I notice you've done that as well. You're uploading the videos on YouTube as well.
Yeah, it does help, and I didn't realize. In fact, it was Cameron Hale. I was talking to him on the phone about YouTube, and I didn't realize he's like, yeah, there are certain people that will not go anywhere else but YouTube to consume their content, whether it be audio or video or any of these kind of informational blog posts that you can turn into videos. And ever since then, there are certain people that I'll only hear from on YouTube. So, well, what's your YouTube channel if you needed to search that so people can
it's simply the Hominid Hunter.
Okay. I'll make sure to have that linked up for you.
Easy one to remember.
Yeah, and again, the website is hominid-hunter.blogspot.com. Yeah, the funny thing about even the websites that seem a little fancy and upscale, you lose stuff on there too. Mine does that all the time. I'll click on something and I'm like, well, that's different now. Okay. It's its own cryptid, is website stuff.
Yeah, you need to be careful when you're playing around with those blogs. It's quite easy to delete stuff forever, permanently.
Yeah. All right, Dan, so where else have you traveled in order to kind of be this, the hominid hunter?
Well, basically, since we last talked, I was able to do almost a 6-week expedition in Nepal. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then I spent over almost 3 weeks in Sumatra with an Indonesian researcher. Okay, we were researching both the orang pendek and the newer cryptid known as the orang gadang, which actually just means big person. And most recently, I was in Vietnam, in the infamous Three Borders region, which a lot of people talk about, but actually nobody's actually been there. Mm. So a couple of very interesting expeditions last year or so.
And so why hasn't anyone gone out there besides you? Is it hard to get to? Is it a little dangerous to be there?
Well, the thing is, I was actually puzzled because if you think about the rock apes, they're like almost number 3 on the food chain. You have the Bigfoot, you got the Yetis, and you have the rock apes. Mm-hmm. And there's been hundreds of articles written on rock apes, lots of experts on rock apes. But at the same time, you kind of realize nobody's actually done research there, and I couldn't explain that. But initially, I thought maybe it's because the area was off limits for quite a few years. Okay, that was the information that I was getting when I was researching this project, that you can't go in there, foreigners aren't allowed. Mm. But it was completely different.
Yeah, and we'll swing back to the rock apes because we have a lot of questions on those guys, of course. Yeah, I saw the video that you posted with Dali, and those that listen to the main show will not have heard this because I posted this for insiders, but I spoke to Dali, the researcher that you met up with in Sumatra for orang gadang and orang pendek. That was actually, I went ahead and put that up for insiders only. Okay. But how was your time there with Dali? Did you guys get a lot of time out in the field, and did you find anything interesting?
Well, actually, I've posted some stuff on my YouTube channel. Yeah, we found a lot of tracks. Okay, and actually, we made 3 casts, 2 of which actually came out. The second cast it just didn't set properly, the plaster.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to abandon that. But we actually found 2 excellent casts, which I did actually forward the photos to Professor Meldrum for analysis.
What did he say? Has he come back to you yet?
Yeah, he got back to me rather quickly, actually. He told me the first track was very probably made by a sun bear.
Okay.
It was, even though when we were looking at the tracks in the dirt, they look almost completely different than the cast. It's kind of strange.
Oh, wow.
You see this track there, looks almost like a human foot. And when we got the cast made, it kind of looked a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
So I did actually send photos of that, and he told me he was pretty sure. He actually did a brief graphic analysis for me. He said it was very probably from a sun bear. The second track, or the third track we found, which was really, very strange, we found this on a creek bed. And this track appeared to have an opposable toe. That means a toe on the side.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I actually sent that to him. His analysis was that it was possibly not made by an animal. It was just kind of natural formation.
Oh.
Which I thought was kind of odd, because it actually did look like something took a step out of the creek, one step, and then there weren't any further tracks. But I've also got that posted on my YouTube channel as well, that second track. And then we found another track, and this one was actually quite. You see this track? It actually had opposing big toe.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, we put the plaster down. We waited for like 3-4 hours. Nothing happened. The plaster didn't form. Just like a big massive glue, gel. So we had to abandon that. But I did actually set up cameras there for one night in that area. And unfortunately, we didn't get anything.
Is it harder in a really humid climate like that to have those casts set properly?
Yeah, it's very difficult because you've got a lot of moisture in the ground. Okay, there's high humidity, 80-90% humidity. And this was we were there, I guess it was in June. So kind of end of the rainy season, but still kind of wet.
Mm-hmm.
So very, very difficult unless you've got some really, kind of drier dirt, and you've got a really nice, big, kind of a larger, deeper track as well. A lot easier to cast that way.
You and Dally really get out a lot. I mean, if you pay attention, you folks out there listening to Dally, and I'll link all of his stuff for his pages, and he's got his own Instagram. He's just always out in the bush, and so are you. So it was really good to see you guys both together at the same time. And something that you mentioned in the video, which I thought was so interesting, is you brought up the supernatural aspect of it, and the natives there will sometimes call them the tall ghost.
Right. I mean, this is, in terms of kind of paranormal percentage, most people think the orang pendek is an actual creature. Okay, I would say about 75% of the people I've interviewed over the last 7 or 8 years believe it's like a physical, flesh and blood animal.
Mm-hmm.
While with the Sumatran Bigfoot, it's probably the other way around. Okay, so they have different names for it. They call it hantu tinggi, which means tall ghost. So there's a very strong paranormal aspect to the Sumatran Bigfoot. And it's also one of those creatures that's very, very rarely seen. I only heard about it a few years ago. Even though I had thought I knew all about all the cryptids in Southeast Asia, I heard about it a couple of years ago when I was investigating orang pendek, and they were referring to it under a different name. They were calling it orang mawas. Okay, and orang mawas is the term that they're using nowadays for the Malaysian Bigfoot. So when I first heard it, I was confused. Is this guy talking about a cryptid here in Sumatra, or is he talking about the orang mawas of Malaysia? And then later I found out that actually it's also referred to as orang mawas in some regions of Sumatra.
Yeah, that could definitely get really confusing very quickly.
When
you're trying to separate them.
So I was kind of confused because he said he saw it in the south and it was called orang mawas. So I thought he meant south. He meant like the neighboring country of Malaysia, which is just across the strait there. But and just so people know, the term orang mawas, the term mawas can mean primitive, could also mean primate, could also mean monkey.
Mm.
Okay, because this term is used thrown around quite regularly by cryptozoologists, but nobody's actually been able to explain what it means. But it actually could mean primate, monkey, or primitive.
Mm. Primitive, like a human?
Yeah, like a primitive human. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so the orangutan versus the pendek. I always see the Pendek as more of a like the red-haired orangutan, whereas the Gadang is this taller creature, much more like the American Bigfoot. Is that the proper way to think of these guys?
Right. Now, the orang pendek, from my research, and like I said, a lot of stuff that I've collected doesn't match up with other people, with other kind of well-known cryptozoology. But yeah, the orang pendek is actually much smaller than what's been described in the classic literature. It's not 4 or 5 feet tall. It's probably around 4 feet, or actually around 3 feet, 3.5. Doesn't have long hair. For some reason, people keep on talking about this long hair.
Yeah.
It doesn't have long hair. Okay. It's powerfully built. It's got incredibly wide shoulders, 50% wider than the average person. It's got no neck, and it has a very human-like face, and there's no sagittal crest either. I've interviewed people that have a pointy head. No, it's almost like a human head with human-like eyes.
Oh, wow.
And also the face doesn't protrude forwards like, say, a chimp or a gorilla's.
Mm-hmm.
So a very human-like face, but powerfully built. And also the limbs, the arms and legs have human proportions. Okay? That's another thing to remember. It doesn't have like short, stubby legs like a chimpanzee or a gorilla. And the other thing that almost everybody mentions, it has a stomach, a protruding abdomen.
You think that's just from what it's eating?
Exactly. I mean, every person I've talked to, they always mention 2 characteristics: super wide shoulders and this kind of beer belly. And it's possibly because it does eat a lot of vegetation.
Right.
Even though a lot of people claim it does actually eat frogs, and there are stories of locals seeing it, or actually of it getting trapped in fish traps that have been set up in smaller lakes and rivers, kind of getting entangled in fish traps as well. So it would be omnivorous. It would be, a little bit of fish, frogs, maybe small rodents, and also larvae. That's another thing that was mentioned to me by some of the people I've trekked with, that it kind of digs up larvae from under rotting logs.
Oh, that would make sense. Good little quick protein source, right?
Exactly, yeah. So orang pendek, very small. Now this orang gadang, now the interesting thing is, this term actually appears in Ivan T. Sanderson's book from 1960. I'm not sure if you have that book.
Is that the Apes Among Us?
Oh, no, it's The Abominable Snowman.
Oh, okay.
It's a famous book. It's like the second book on cryptids that came out in 1960. And he actually has that term in the book, orang gadang. Oh. But there's no explanation for it. So apparently he had heard of it. He doesn't explain what it is. He just mentions that, one of the many, cryptids of Sumatra, the orang gadang. Right. So people have actually mentioned it. So this term has been around for quite a few, at least from the 50s, but it hasn't actually been mentioned in mainstream cryptozoology except in that one book. Well, now Oh no, go ahead. Well, these orangutangs are basically, if these creatures are real, they would actually be the same species as the Malaysian Bigfoot.
Okay.
And which is known. Well, the original name is Orang Dalam. Okay, Orang Dalam means person of the interior. Okay. Now, this cryptid, I'm sure, existed or exists. Why did I say that? Well, there was a famous photograph. There was a famous expedition in 1970. Okay. And have you seen the photos from that expedition? The trackway on the sandbank. Sandbank.
Yes.
Right. Now, the individual who was leading the expedition, Mr. Harold Stevens, he's retired. He lives in Bangkok. And I've met up with him on numerous occasions, most recently about 2 weeks ago. So we've discussed this expedition for hours and hours each time we meet up. So I'm pretty sure that's probably in some ways the best evidence we have for any type of hominid, is that trackway photograph in 1970. And so my theory is that these orang dalams of Malaysia are actually also these orang gadangs, these giant creatures anywhere from 10 to 12 feet tall, tracks anywhere from 24 to 28 inches. Very shaggy-like creatures, kind of human-like face, but with an upturned nose. And so that's the orang gadang. Now it's only been recently reported in Sumatra. These sightings have only been around for the last couple of years.
Dan, would it bother you to see one of these things that had the very human-looking face?
Yeah, actually, I'll tell you a story when we get to the rock capes. A very interesting story. But yeah, I would be. It depends on what I was doing. If I just wanted to photograph it, I wouldn't have any problems. But if it were, if you were going to kill one, then yeah, I'm probably sure I would have problems with it.
Right. Yeah, that's come up so much on my show, and I've always said that I think there'd be a huge difference seeing one that looks more gorilla-like versus one that looks more human-like. I think that would open up all sorts of questions about them and us and the whole, the crossover, what are they really? So
Right.
Well, let's jump into the Yeti. And first, if we could, before we get to the questions from the listeners, let's talk about the post that you've got up on hominidhunterblogspot.com. And, you start right out and you're like, hey, there's these strange tracks at 13,000 feet. And I like, because you kind of had the breakdown of different things that you guys came across. So if you could kind of set us up on what that looked like for you guys, because you guys are up in the snow and you're hiking, and with all the gear, you did the whole full-on hike to get up there to these, the possible moderate area. You said it was a moderate altitude, but still pretty high for most people.
Right, it was high for me as well, and my boots fell apart like 3 weeks before. So I was suffering because my boots would the ice would just seep in. Oh. So I had to make sure the treks were less than 3 hours. Then I had to head back because I was actually, I might have actually had a mild case of frostbite. So I came back to Bangkok, my toes were numb for about a week. So definitely next time I'll be taking extra boots with me just to be sure. But just some background on that expedition. Well, that expedition took place. It's what's known as the Sangku Sabah region. Okay, this is right beside the Solo Khumbu, which is the famous Everest region, where virtually most of the Yeti expeditions have taken place.
Okay.
Yeah. Now this area is more commonly known today as the Makalu Barren National Park. Okay, and if you're a fan of Yetis, you know that this area is famous, especially in the old stories from the 50s and 60s, because there's two places there called the Arun Valley and the Barun Valley. Okay, and so if you read any of the old classic books, these places are always mentioned. And also in this area, there was a famous expedition in 1959. It was the third Tom Slick expedition. I'm not sure if you're familiar with those ones.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So my goal, I had actually a couple of goals. My goal was to actually trek up this valley where this 1959 Slick expedition was based, because I assumed they went there for some reason. They probably had some good, good tip-offs to go there. So the first goal was to go up into this valley, okay, as far as we could, interview Sherpas, set up trail cameras, and then the second goal was to head over to the Barun Valley, which is considered by many experts to be a prime Yeti habitat, and then set up, cameras down by the river and also above the snowfields above the river, which connect with various other smaller valleys. So that was the objective. Now, the first place we went to, a place that's called, in the books, is referred to as Choi Hoyong Kola. Okay, this is where the Slick expedition was based in 1959. Now, Choi Hoyong, you won't find that on the maps anymore because it's been renamed. Okay, yeah, it's renamed, so it's now referred to as the Apshua Valley, Apshua River.
Was that for any specific reason, or is that kind of odd that they did that?
I have no idea. I mean, the village is still there. The Choyong village settlement is still there. It's just the older maps. If you look at older maps, it's listed as Choyong, Valley, but all the new trekking maps is mentioned as Apshua Valley. For some reason, they've changed it, but it's the same place. And this place is actually not that high. I mean, the altitudes are, most of the people live below 10,000 feet, most of the Sherpas. And the surrounding mountains are probably around 15,000, 16,000 feet. It's only when you get to the very end of the valley, there's a glacier, and then there's some peaks around 18,000 feet, which we unfortunately couldn't get to.
Yeah, I'm just scrolling through some of the pictures here, and I encourage everybody to go to your website. Sorry if I sounded distracted. I was just looking through some of the pictures, and then you do go through some of the things, and you're kind of, you're debunking yourself, which is what you're supposed to do, right? If you can. And you're mentioning some different animals that probably made the tracks. I mean, you can't be 100% sure. You're talking about ungulates, and then at a different altitude, where was I at? Oh, so there is a picture that does look like an interesting, like a paw print or something larger. But you mentioned that there was a Himalayan gray wolf around there, which I didn't realize they had gray wolves in the Himalayas. But But they do. You actually got a nighttime photo of that, which is also up on your website. How many Sherpas did you have on your expedition with you?
Well, first of all, the guy that I hired wasn't actually a Sherpa. He was a Chetri. There's actually 3 ethnic groups in this area. Lower down, you have the Chetri ethnic group. Then kind of the middle altitudes, you have what are known as the Rai ethnic group, the Rai people. Okay? And then further up, you have the Sherpas. Right? And the interesting thing is, and a lot of people don't realize, is that the Sherpas are relatively new to this area. Okay? The Sherpas don't actually come from Nepal. And this is very important when you study, their folklore about Yetis. They don't actually come from Nepal. They actually come from the Kham region, which is a region in eastern Tibet that borders the Chinese provinces of Qinghai and Yunnan. So the Sherpas are relatively newcomers to this area.
I did not know that at all.
Yeah, that's very important because when you...
Yeah, you think of the Himalayas and your mind already wanders to the Sherpas because you think of they're the ones that help with the Everest expeditions and they don't need oxygen because they lived up there for so long that they, their lungs don't need the extra oxygen. Your mind just goes there automatically.
Yeah, and the thing is, they've done genetic studies and they only came about 500 years ago to the Himalayas, so they slowly migrated. Now, I've actually been to the Kham region. But I've been on the Chinese side because you can't get into the Tibetan side as a solo tourist. I've actually been on that border where you have Yunnan province and then you have this Kham region of Tibet. It's very mountainous, peaks around 18,000 feet, 19,000 feet in that area. So they are actually from the high altitudes, but they just migrated over the centuries until they finally got to Nepal. But the thing is, my guide was not a Sherpa, he was a Chetri. But he was actually, there was one section where he actually took some gear from a Sherpa onto his backpack. So this guy could carry his weight. I mean, he was carrying, and the guy was probably like 150 pounds.
Right.
100 pounds on his back.
Those guys are bad to the bone. They are so impressive.
And even more impressive was his buddy who came along as the porter. And this guy, I told him he had a back because I always bring extra backpacks for these guys because they don't have. So this guy had his mask. It was in a basket, just a bag, like a potato sack. And he had this filled to like well over 100 pounds, and he had this kind of a strap on his forehead, and he grabbed it from behind his head. Right? So he was basically walking with his hands behind his head for the whole trek.
Oh, my God.
Up incredibly steep. There's sections where I was scrambling with my arms and legs, scrambling to get up. This guy's just balancing on 2 feet.
Oh, my God. He would be like a chiropractor's dream, right? Like any chiropractor would be like, you got to get on my table with, posture like that, walking with all that weight and your arms above your head like that. Oh, my goodness.
His posture is great, but it's when you see the older Sherpas, then you see the problems later on.
Takes it.
But this guy, this is amazing, and I actually videoed. If I can find the video, I'll send it to you.
That would be awesome.
But this guy just had this massive sack on his back. It was well over 100 pounds. This dude might have been 145 maximum.
Oh my God.
I'd
be crying in 10 minutes. I think most of us would. That's just out of our norm.
Yeah, I was just thinking you could take the fittest guy in the gym. He wouldn't last more than 100 meters.
No.
This guy, and the funny thing is nobody had calf muscles in that whole region. You would
Really?
think, I'm a PE teacher, so now you figured, you'd have like massive calves. I probably had the most muscular calves in the whole area there. I was carrying around, I was carrying like a 20-pound backpack. So these guys are, lugging stuff over 100 pounds up incredibly, even though they're like trails. They're not really trails. Okay, there was one section right above the river. That wasn't a trail. It was just rock and rock. It was almost vertical. It was just crazy. But luckily we had good weather, so it was okay.
Yeah, what kind of gear are you taking there, Dan? As far as the camera gear, are you doing GoPros and DSLRs, or what kind of stuff works up there in that kind of weather?
Well, basically, I'm still pretty low tech, so I've got 4 trail cams with me, Bushnell, which are pretty good. And then I just usually carry one of those compact zoom travel cameras with like a 40 zoom on it.
Right.
Because it's very small, you can strap it onto your chest. Now, I've seen tourists there with these big mega cameras. I'm not sure I could, I'd probably fall and break it after like half an hour.
Right.
So, but I'm seriously considering getting a better camera just to get more of the kind of scenery, more high altitude photos of the mountains and so on. But I think for now, travel zoom is pretty good, and it's got a pretty good video as well.
Yeah, there's a number of photos of you guys pretty damn high up from the looks of it, and you're setting up your trail cams and such. So while you were there, I mean, did you come across anything that you couldn't quite explain, or did you hear anything strange?
Well, the first valley I went to where the Slick expedition was based, one of my goals was to find the oldest Sherpas I could find and interview them. Okay, that was one of my top goals. And what happened, I found actually 2 Sherpas. One was like 82 years old, and the other guy was 85. So these guys were in their prime back in the 1950s. And I interviewed both of them, and they had some amazing stories to tell me, which I haven't actually mentioned on my blog or on my YouTube channel. So you'll be the first to hear them. Now, the first thing is the name for the Yeti is very, very interesting here. They have a completely different name for this creature here, and it's referred to as the Shokpa.
Oh.
Okay, so this is a term I have never heard before. I mean, have you heard of it? No, probably not.
No, it's say it one more time. The Shokpa.
Shokpa. So it's like shock and pa. So
Pa. P-A-H. Okay.
Yeah, it's actually S-O-K-P-A. Shokpa.
Wow.
Now, I was like, what the heck? Because usually they would say Zute or Mehte or something like that, right? It was like basically in all the books. They were using the word Shokpa, and I'm like, what the hell's a Shokpa? So when I got back to Bangkok after the expedition, the first thing I did is I went through all my old books, because I kind of collect these old books from the 50s and 60s and 70s. And it wasn't there, but it was in a booklet that I bought about 3 years ago when I was in Nepal by a Nepali researcher. He's written this little booklet on Yetis, and he's probably the only Nepali to ever write a book on Yetis. And he's got that term numerous times in the book, under different variations, Shokpa, Chokpa. And he says that term is not actually a Sherpa term, it's a Rai term, which are Rais, which are an ethnic group which lives lower down in the kind of lower altitudes around 6,000 feet. So that was very, very strange, because most of the terms we associate with either being, Sherpa terms or Tibetan terms and some Nepali terms. But this term was actually a local term used by the group that lives lower down. And the Sherpas were also using this term, the Shokpa.
Yeah, I've never heard that term. That is very interesting. The Shokpa.
Yeah, you would think by now all the term people would have known all the terms. There's always people arguing about the meaning of the various terms, right?
Right.
It means bear. No, it doesn't mean. It means man. It means bear. People arguing on the internet all the time about the exact meaning of these words. But in this book that I have by this Nepali researcher, he says it's a Rai term, and it's used extensively in the air, because that was actually the only term they were using. Even my guide, Shokpa. That's the term that's used in that Makula Barren region, is the Shokpa. And for some reason, it hasn't been recorded by any of the expeditions that have been there before I went there.
No, it certainly hasn't caught on, because I've never heard it mentioned on any other podcasts that I listen to either. So, or any books that I have, which isn't extensive. But okay, so what did the man that wrote the book, the only man that he's from that area, and he wrote a book on the Yeti, is he calling it a bear? Does he think it's a hybrid, or does he think it's actually a bipedal creature, massive, what we would like to think of it maybe being?
Right. Well, the author of this book, I think his name is Professor Pandai, if I'm not mistaken. I've reached out to him, but he hasn't never returned my emails. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, his book, he's kind of on the fence and leaning more towards the bear theory.
Okay.
Now these Sherpas that I interviewed, they had some very fascinating stories, and they weren't bear related. And so the first Sherpa I interviewed, he was 82 years old. We met him actually on the trail. He had been hiking for 3 days. He had gone to see the doctor.
Oh my God!
On the other side of the valley. So there's I mentioned this Arun Valley that everybody talks about. It's supposed to be a prime Yeti habitat. Well, he actually trekked down, went across, and then climbed up to another village to see a doctor.
He's 82, and to go see the doctor, he had to walk for 3 days.
3 days one way.
Wow.
And then he was making a return trip back to the village. So we encountered him on the trail there.
Right.
And so what happened is we actually ended up staying at his house. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we actually trekked with him, and he was actually pretty quick, a little probably faster than me. And this guy, 82-year-old guy, he's trekking this incredibly steep trail. So we got back to his place. We had some food there, and then I kind of started gently interviewing him about the Yetis and so on. And yeah, so he was telling me the term is Shokpa, and he told me that many, many times throughout his years or throughout his lifetime, he had encountered what he said were man-sized Shokpa tracks. Okay, so man-sized, that would be equivalent to the Mechte, which is kind of the man-sized Yeti with the cone head. Right? Because they talk about 3 different Yetis. Okay, they talk about this big one, medium, and a small one. So he told me he had encountered these tracks on several occasions in the snow. Altitude is around 15,000 feet when he was herding yak or zo. A zo is kind of a yak cow hybrid they use. And so he had encountered these man-sized tracks, and I asked him about whistling. You know what the story about whistling?
Mm-hmm.
Yetis always whistle, kind of story. The mountaineers hearing these whistles in the nighttime, and he said he had never ever heard a whistle, a whistling sound. Yeah. So so that's kind of fascinating. And so I asked him if he had ever seen one. He had never seen a Yeti, even though he had been there for his entire life. He was grazing cattle, these zoos at really high altitudes, and what's called a karka. Karka is kind of like a summer pasture.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically probably just from let's say probably from May till October you can graze cattle at these really high altitude pastures. Then the snow comes and you can't go up there anymore. And so he spent his whole life exploring this whole area, and he had never actually seen a Yeti, even though he had seen the tracks on several occasions, at least the man-sized tracks.
Was he still a little skeptical about it since he hadn't seen the actual creature with his own eyes, or because he has seen these man-sized tracks on more than one occasion, he's like, yeah, they're out there, they're just really elusive?
Yeah, I think that was kind of opinion. That was the kind of feeling I got from actually both of them, that these things are out there. They're not bears, but they're out there. Even though we haven't seen one,
right? They're
out there. I mean, they probably encountered these tracks several times, maybe a dozen times. So they're pretty convinced these things are out there. They don't bother anyone. Because I did ask about livestock being eaten, because that's a common theme in the Yeti stories about these Yetis coming down and killing cattle or whatever, killing these does, or killing livestock and dragging them back into these high altitude caves. And both of these Sherpas, they said they had never ever lost livestock, which is that's kind of the common narrative.
Yeah,
of the story.
Right. I mean, especially if they're trekking these cattle and the livestock through some of these really remote areas, at least I get the impression that sometimes they have to stay overnight, and they have to, they're letting them graze and they're doing their thing, and it's like a week or 2 long trip or whatever they might be doing. You would think at some point maybe one of those would get snatched up as an easy food source, but I don't know.
Yeah, that was the thing that because I was asking them all these kind of classic kind of stereotypes of Yetis, whistling and livestock disappearing, eating, and none of them said they had ever encountered that. And then about 3 or 4 hours further north, there was another village. We stayed there, and this was actually a Sherpa village like the previous one, and we met a Sherpa there who was 85. Okay, so he was 85, and this guy had even more stories to tell me, more information. And he was talking about 3 types of tracks that he had encountered, in his 85 years as a Sherpa up in the Himalayas there. And the first type of track, he said, which was quite commonly found, were about the size of your hand. Okay. And the term he used is the telma. This is actually a common term used. Are you familiar with telmas?
No.
Okay. Telma is the pygmy Yeti, the small Yeti. Okay. And for some reason, the telmas were really discussed and researched back in the 50s and 60s and 70s. But for some reason, people have just lost interest in them. There haven't been any expeditions for telmas. There haven't been any TV shows on telmas. For some reason, they're totally ignored now. And this valley is actually famous for telmas. That's one of the reasons I went there, because there were actually some reports back in the early 70s. I think it was some zoological team that apparently had seen a telma. So he was telling me that the most common track that he found were these size of your hand, of with 5 little toes on them, and these were found both in mud, dirt, and also in higher elevations in snow. Okay, so. And the interesting is that the term matched. After hearing that Shokpa term, I thought they would have a different term for the telma, but they just used the word telma. So I was kind of surprised when he said that.
How pygmy is the pygmy Yeti?
Well, supposedly, the stories are very similar to the orang pendek.
Okay.
So about 3 to 4 feet tall. Okay. And the other strange thing is a lot of the folklore regarding telmas, they say they have the feet turned backwards. Okay. And this also matches the folklore of the orang pendek, which is often referred to as orang pendek kaki terbalik. And kaki terbalik just means feet turned around or feet turned backwards. So a lot of similarities between the telma and the orang pendek. And also the fact that supposedly, and this is what the Sherpa told me, he thought that the telmas probably just also ate like frogs and smaller animals. And they inhabit lower down, the kind of right beside the lower altitudes, which is tropical and subtropical. Okay.
And would they be mostly bipedal or quadrupedal?
Yeah. Well, they would be bipedal. They're basically it's kind of just like an orang pendek or just a miniature version of a yeti. Very small, agile, feeding on possibly fish, larvae, also some vegetation, and so they would be quite small. So very similar. I mean, if these things were real, if you could probably classify them, they would probably be in the same genus as an orang pendek.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds completely like the pendek.
It does, yeah. And I'm not one of those guys that believes that there's dozens and dozens of hominids running around.
Yeah.
Like some cryptids, there's 12 different types. Now, there's probably maybe 3 or 4 max. And they would all basically either have a tiny one, huge one, and then something maybe man-sized.
Yeah.
3, maybe 4 different types if they're still around. So he told me that he had on numerous occasions found these telma tracks at various elevations, and then he talked about the man-sized tracks, which the previous Sherpa had mentioned, and then this is where it gets interesting. And then he told me that only a few times during his lifetime, only a couple of times, he encountered some very strange tracks. And what he was doing, he was actually he was pointing to his forearm, and I'm kind of looking like, what are you like? What's he trying to tell me? Like he was pointing to his forearm, is kind of like where. At the elbow joint, he's like pointing to his forearm. I'm trying to figure out what's he trying to tell me. Does it walk on his forearms or something? And then my guide, he goes, no. He was saying that the tracks were the size of his forearm and his hand. Oh. So he was trying to show me that the length was actually around 24 over basically from your forearm, from the elbow, the tips of your fingers. Wow. So approximately over 24 inches.
Oh boy.
And then the amazing thing is, then the Sherpa, this 85-year-old Sherpa, he gets up, he stands up, and he takes the biggest step he could possibly take. And then he tells me that the most impressive thing about these giant Shokpas is that they have a massive stride length in deep snow. So he gets up there and he takes his biggest stride he could take, and this guy's in his 85, and so he takes like a 4-foot stride. And so he was telling me that's the most impressive thing is that massive tracks, 24 inches. Plus 24 inches with a stride length of anywhere 4 to 5 feet in deep snow.
Which would match up. If they have feet that big, they would have to have a stride at least that long, right? Exactly, right. I mean, this is when I always look at trackways, Bigfoot trackways, stuff like that, I always look at stride length. That's something key when you're analyzing photos. Any type of hominid trackway, you need to look at the stride length. So he was telling me massive stride lengths. But he had only seen this a couple times during his whole lifetime. He didn't say how many times, but only a couple times. So this was incredibly uncommon to see these massive tracks with this tremendous 5-foot stride length. Very, very rare. And I asked him about food, and he said what they would eat. He said they would probably eat some type of blue sheep or some type of blue sheep or some of the barking deer or something like that. Now, I asked him if he had ever seen one, and he said no. He had never actually seen one. So neither of these Sherpas with a combined age of over 167 had ever seen a Yeti. But he told me one of his friends did. And this is a very fascinating story. He didn't actually say what had happened, but he said it happened many, many years ago. And it happened at a place called Mera Peak. Now, are you familiar with Mera Peak? No. Well, Mera Peak is the highest climbing peak in Nepal, which means it's the highest kind of peak a recreational hobbyist can climb. Okay, it's like 21,000 feet. So it's the highest peak. So it's a very popular peak for the non-professional mountain climbers, right?
So if you wanted to impress your friends, which peak would you climb in Nepal? You would climb Mera Peak, either Island Peak or Mera Peak. So this Mera Peak is a very busy peak, and it gets summited around 500 times per year. But the story goes that his friend was on an expedition there, a mountaineering expedition, many, many years ago on Mera Peak. And while he was up there on a neighboring mountain that was a little bit further away, a little bit lower in altitude, he saw this massive, hairy, brown creature bounding down the slopes. Okay? So, and that was the only person he knew that had ever seen a Yeti. Just one of his friends, many years ago, on some kind of trekking, mountaineering expedition at Mera Peak, sees on a neighboring mountain, not on Mera Peak itself, but on one of the neighboring mountains, we have a, amazing vantage point. He sees this massive, brown, kind of human-like, hairy figure. It's kind of bounding down the slopes of a mountain.
I can't imagine seeing that, to be honest. I mean, you're already out in the middle of nowhere, basically, with just probably a few people, because his friend was probably the one guiding them or carrying their stuff.
Right.
Did he kind of hint that his friend was either shocked or surprised or scared or anything by that?
I had the feeling that this happened many, many years ago. And so I was the kind of impression that, how it is when you get older, it's hard to remember exact things. And, so this could have happened decades ago.
Yeah.
He didn't actually specify. He just said a long time ago on Mera Peak, and which I guess it's a famous climbing peak. So, so it's kind of strange that you have all these individuals spending, decades out there in some incredibly remote areas, which even which no expeditions ever bothered to go to, and yet they have never actually seen one. So that's incredibly puzzling.
I mean, I just wonder if there's a super, super low number of these things to where maybe they barely make it every year to where they have offspring enough to perpetuate the species up there, especially the bigger ones. It makes you wonder. They just are hardly ever seen.
Yeah, well, I mentioned this about the orang dalam of Malaysia and the orang gadang. I mean, I'm not going to. There's not breeding populations. I mean, there might be one or two pairs somewhere, but my guess is that they're down to like the last one or two individuals.
Yeah.
Okay, so up in the Himalayas, you might have every region there might be one or two solitary yetis of some sort. Also, the orang pendix. There's a question about populations. I don't think there might be 40, maybe 30 orang pendix. Because you hear all these claims about Bigfoot. There might be like 500 or 5,000 Bigfoot living in the Pacific Northwest or something like that. Get these crazy claims. But yeah, I think for most of these hominids, there's just a few left in every area. Well, possibly solitary individuals.
Thank you for sharing those stories. I wasn't expecting that. That's so cool that you actually got a hold of those two guys. Of course, the one guy you just happened to run across on a trail, you said, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, I was planning this all along. I mean, I was planning on interviewing these guys. That was one of my goals. Kind of my B plan was to kind of interview as many elderly Sherpas as I could, because their ideas they haven't been influenced by the internet and other things. So so that was actually planned. So I was kind of actively looking around for elderly Sherpas that I could talk to.
Are they kind of skittish about talking to outsiders about this?
Well, there's a lot of people moving around. I mean, Nepal is incredibly popular. There's a lot of people trekking there. Mm-hmm. People get this idea that nobody treks. People are trekking. The Everest region, the region where I go to. When I went to the other valleys, there's almost like a bottleneck of tourists. And also, people are flying in by chopper to these base camps. So there's a lot of people with money who are lazy to trek for 6-7 days. They will fly in.
If you got the money, right? They do that.
Right. So every day you would see choppers flying over to the Makalu base camp.
So is that the Makalu? Is that the one that's in all the movies, like in Into Thin Air by John Krakauer? That's one of my favorite books because he actually survived that horrible expedition where 11 people died. But is that the Everest base camp then that you could see the helicopters going into?
This is actually the 5th highest peak in the world, and it's very similar to Everest. It's very busy, but not as busy as Everest. Okay. Everest is crazy. But even at the even when I was flying to this Makalu region, everybody was taking flights to the Everest region.
Wow.
Lukla. I mean, there's this math. So this area it's just crazy. And there's 500 people summiting Everest in 4 weeks or something like that.
Oh my God! I just read an article about all of the garbage at base camp. That it's just a big old garbage dump now. That's sad.
There's also a lot of bodies, remains,
Right.
still frozen that haven't been removed.
Right.
So yeah, it's definitely the place. I mean, I mean, if even I had the money, I would be like last place to go. If I was looking for Yetis, I would never go to the Everest region.
Right.
Possibly is Mera Peak, which is in the Everest region, but there are other areas that I've actually been to, like Dalagiri, and I'm actually planning going back to Kachijunga possibly next year. That's probably the most remote area, and nobody's actually bothered to do any type of Yeti research in that area, in that region, eastern Nepal. And so there's still quite a few places to visit, but you need to be really selective. You kind of have to figure out where nobody goes. Yeah. And at the same time, there has to be some kind of a history of Yetis in that area as well.
Has there ever been a report anywhere near Everest where people climb, maybe in the beginning stages of when people would go out there to climb? Has there ever been a report of a Yeti out there?
There's been reports in that area. I mean, the 1951, the tracks that were photographed by Shipton, that was in the Everest region.
It was. That's right. The Shipton tracks.
Yeah. Right. And the thing is, though, there was never a trackway. In all the books, there's always a trackway that's shown. That was photographed from a completely different area.
Right.
So they never actually photographed the track. They photographed one track with possibly a second track below it. But they never photographed the trackway. And I guess a lot of the skeptics are claiming it was probably a fabrication. A mix between a foot and a moccasin. I think that's kind of the best explanation I've seen.
That does seem to resurface every couple of years. Someone will write a new blog about that. The Shipton track.
Right,
so,
yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. But the fact, people have to remember, there was no trackway ever photographed. Okay, so in the books, there's always a trackway that was actually photographed from a different. I think it was the same day or the day before, different place, completely different. So they never actually had a trackway. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. Very
so
misleading.
I'm always suspicious of. Yeah. So I'm always, even when I'm doing my own research, if I don't see a trackway. I mean, it's more difficult with an Oryx pendic, right? Because they're quite small. They're around 100 to 130 pounds.
Right.
But if I'm researching like a Bigfoot or a Yeti or something like that, and there's no trackway, then I'm going to basically I'm going to have to kind of dismiss the whole thing. There has to be a trackway. And this is what happened when I was in Sumatra last year. People were, the team that I was with, they claimed there was a orangutan trackway. I didn't see anything. So yeah, you have to have a very, very convincing trackway. I think that's the thing for me.
Unless you're entertaining the stories of that they're paranormal and just drop out of the sky and then leave whenever they want, right? The way that they came.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. So they take, it takes one or, because most even with the Sasquatch stuff, there's usually just one or two, one or two kind of decent, tracks, and then they disappear. So yeah, so either if they're flesh and blood, they need to be leaving a trackway. Otherwise, they can't be, flesh and blood animals. But yeah, and I also sent you some photos of tracks that we found. And now my guide, who was with me the whole time, he claimed there's a track there with like 4 or 5 little toes on it. He claimed that was a Telma track. There was actually a trackway there as well. I mean, I sent you a photo there of a little track.
Yeah.
Right. And what he did, there's a picture there where he actually drew the outline of the foot. I don't know if you see that picture.
That's the one I was trying to get at earlier, but I couldn't find the right words to ask the proper question. So, okay, interesting. Yes, I did get that, and I will post that in show notes for everybody. Right.
Now, the thing is, okay, so I'm looking at this trackway, and that trackway is photographed right beside it. There's a trackway. It just kept on going forever and ever. Mm-hmm. And my guide, he said, that's a Telma. And my reaction goes, well, where's the heel?
Right.
And then he goes, no, Telmas walk on the balls of their feet.
Oh, interesting. And had you heard that up till then?
No. And then he proceeded with his finger to draw that outline of the foot.
Okay. That's where I was.
Understand? Yeah. So that's why it looks kind of odd, because I didn't do that. And he just got down there and he kind of drew quickly this outline of saying that's what the Telma foot looks like with these little toes at the top. And that when they're in the snow, they walk on the balls of their feet.
That's exactly what it looks like, though. Now that you have explained that to me, I have it up on my screen here, and everybody can, right now, if you're listening to this on your phone or something, just go to the website. I'll have it in the show notes. But it does. It looks like ball of the foot. You can see the toes. and then you can see where the guide drew the outline, but there is a full trackway there. Were you guys able to find out where it stopped, or was it just too high up, too long?
Well, I had the boot problems, right? So I tried to limit each of these treks to 3 hours.
Right. You like to have all your toes. I don't blame you. So
exactly. Yeah. And so I was like myself, and I had like the cheapest crampons as well. I bought these kind of cheap ones that you buy when it's like I had these cheap, and they were actually holding my boot together.
Oh God.
The soles were just flapping off.
Yeah.
I had like Ziploc bags on my toes, on my feet. I had a couple socks on. I had a couple Ziploc bags. So I didn't have ideal footwear.
Yeah.
So what I did though is I actually set up cameras there. Okay. And that's where I got that wolf photo.
How big do you think that wolf is? I mean,
I think
poundage-wise.
I think they're pretty scrawny compared to what we have in North America. Like wolf up. Yeah. This almost looked like a coyote.
That's exactly why I kind of brought that up, because I was looking at the photo and I'm like, oh, that guy's pretty small, but it must be slim pickings up there for them. I mean, aren't they mostly carnivorous, the poor things?
But they move up and down. Yeah, but there's there's stuff out there. There's hares, there's snow hares, a lot of little cute little furry rodents running around there as well. Yeah. So there's stuff out there, but you just need to look for it. But actually, so I had the camera set up there, and we had quite a bit of gray wolf activity, Himalayan gray wolf that same night, that evening. Okay, because I checked the cameras the next day. Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of leaning toward it was a wolf as opposed to Telma walking on the balls of its feet.
But your guide did get pretty excited, right? Like straight out of the gate, he was like, "Oh no, that's the Telma. That's the Telma track."
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is where it gets even more interesting. We trekked maybe even higher, maybe another 15 minutes to a higher altitude, and then we found another trackway which I photographed as well. Mm-hmm. And these were basically 12-inch tracks, or some that looked like, and they weren't fresh, but there was a trackway with what looked like 12-inch tracks. And I've also sent you that photo as well.
Yes.
I'm sure if you have that one.
Yeah, I have it pulled up right here. Yep.
Yeah, that was and my guy, he goes Shokpa.
Oh, the big boys.
Right, or at least one of them. They didn't differentiate the big and small. They just used the term Shokpa for the man-sized animal.
Oh,
right.
Okay.
So, right. They used that. They had just a generic term for just big ones and man-sized. So he's telling me Shokpa, and there was actually what looked like a trackway. Mm-hmm. And there's also a photo I have of these apparently old tracks. The funny thing was they had a very short stride length, but there was one section further up where there was like a gap of maybe 3 feet.
That's weird.
Very, very weird. So, I looked at them. I forgot my measuring tape. I did photograph them, though. My guide was pretty sure they were Shokpa because they were actually something made these tracks. And they were quite old. You can see something made them and then it had snowed over.
That is really weird, though, that it would have the same, because I'm looking at the trackway now. It would have the same stride, and it's not a long stride. And then all of a sudden, there's 3 feet. Why? That's so odd.
I was speculating because I did see a big block of ice on an earlier day that had kind of skipped down a slope. Oh, this big block of ice, and it wouldn't say it looked exactly similar, but I was thinking, well, that could be a possible explanation.
Interesting, yeah.
So this big block, a big block of ice about, let's say, 12, 13 inches, kind of breaks off from some rock, and it kind of skips down. Maybe bounces a little bit and slips down a slope, giving the impression that it looks like it was actually right. So that was my explanation for it, because I just was concerned about the stride length just being way too short.
Oh no, okay, that actually makes a ton of sense then, because it'll come down the mountain, hit the once, and bounce the 3 feet, and then finally slow down enough to make the quote unquote trackway that we see here.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's just my explanation, because even the thing is, though, when I was hiking up that section, my stride length was incredibly short, probably like 3 inches. Because when you're going up a steep hill, I just had one trekking pole. Yeah, your stride length does shorten dramatically. So it's almost something that's like 1 foot in front of the other, like little baby steps. When you're going up,
that's a lot of work. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would love to. The guide was sure that it was a Shokpa trackway. I'm looking at it. It looks pretty convincing, especially when there's that gap of 3 feet.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, the track was quite old. It had been snowed over, but you could still see that there was actually some kind of a trackway of some sort made by something, either an animal. I was thinking maybe a Sherpa, but there was no reason for a Sherpa to be trekking in that area, because that area doesn't lead anywhere. It leads to deeper valleys that nobody goes to. Not even
to go to the doctor or anything, right?
Yeah. I mean, you have to realize that most people stick to the main trekking trail. Okay, and nobody goes up into this area. There was no mountaineering or hiking tracks in that area. It was just us. We walked in there. It was just a beautiful snowfield. And then there was another track which I sent you a long time ago. Something jumped off a boulder. There was I might have sent it to you a long time ago. There was like a boulder, and then there was like a trackway about 3 feet in front of the boulder. That was kind of strange, but I assume that was probably from a deer or something.
Yeah, I think I remember that one. I can find that one and put that in show notes too. What kind of temperatures were you guys looking at during the day and at night up there?
Well, the thing is, I went down to the Barron Valley, to the river itself. I set up cameras. Down there it was probably 6 to 7 degrees. All right. And then when we got up to where we were staying in the cabin, it was probably around just above freezing during the daytime.
Oh, wow. During the daytime.
And then at evenings,
so you don't go out at night because that's dangerous.
There's no. I mean, if I had proper gear, if I had proper crampons, definitely not proper. I would have gone, but there's no reason to go out when you have trail cameras these days, is there? You go out there and rugged terrain, you set up the cameras.
Right.
And in some ways, that's actually better because you're not disturbing the environment.
Yeah. Yeah, you would just scare the Shukpas off anyway.
Right. I mean, I'm sure if I had been up there, I wouldn't have seen that wolf. The gray wolf.
Absolutely.
If I had been camped out on that stuff.
Right.
And it was only like maybe like an hour and a half trek. Well, actually, maybe like an hour. So unless you're trekking like incredibly long distances, there's no reason not to come back. And I've actually kind of learned that. Even when I was in Sumatra last year, the team we had wasn't very good. The guys were making a lot of noise. They were waking up at night, smoking, talking.
Oh God, you're like, really, guys?
Yeah. So after that, I told these guys, okay, we're not going to do any camp. We're just going to trek. Set up the cameras. We're going to trek back. That's the way we're going to do it. Because if we got camera traps, 100 meters away, 200 meters away, and people are up there like at 1 and 2 a.m. smoking and chatting, you're going to scare everything off.
Right.
Of the jungle. So yeah. So I kind of believe in the idea that if you're going to set up cameras, just leave them there, or just trek back halfway. You don't have to go back to the original camp. But I like the idea of having a base camp, then like a mini camp.
Right.
So you have a base camp where you have all your stuff, and then you trek maybe a couple hours, 2-3 hours. Then you set up camp, and then you go another hour or two, and then you set the trails, and you stay at the mini camp that you set up. So that's kind of the strategy I kind of try to use on most expeditions. But yeah, there was no reason there to be freezing when I can have when the camera traps could be up there for me.
No, not when frostbite is literally nipping at your toes, right?
Exactly.
Well, if you don't mind, let's jump into some of the Yeti questions.
Okay, let's go for it, yeah.
Yeah, so Luke Phillips, and he was actually on episode 92. We were talking about, the Lions of Tsavo. He wrote a book called Daughters of the Darkness. Anyhow, he wants to know if you think that the ancient polar bears or brown bear hybrids are possible culprits for the real Yeti, as a DNA finding suggested.
Well, I actually communicated with Professor Sykes a couple of years ago after the book came out, okay? So now his report his paper has been peer-reviewed many, many times now, okay, by geneticists. And the consensus is he kind of misread the data.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So basically, that proto-polar bear that he said it was a proto-polar bear, similar to the findings that were, I think, found in Sweden, a jawbone, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, he misread that, and that the variation is well within the range of a normal brown bear or Himalayan brown bear. Okay. So and I think he actually admitted that later on, and said the main takeaway he said was, okay, maybe I was wrong, but at least it's not a primate. So it's a bear. So I believe that a large portion of these Yeti reports are actually brown bears, but probably some subspecies that's not very well documented. Okay, and I kind of like the Reinhold Mester camel bear theory. Okay, and the camel bears are a subspecies that have larger head, maybe a little bit lighter coloring, and they have a little more bipedal abilities. That meaning they take a few extra steps bipedally when they're looking around and stuff.
So for you, as far as the Yeti goes, you do not go into the camp at all that it might be some kind of a bipedal primate.
Well, after interviewing those Sherpas, I've slightly changed my tune. Okay,
Yeah.
so these guys, right? So I mean, I'm still like 99% sure it's at least the modern day reports are from a bear.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, either some kind of I wouldn't say it's not going to be this hybrid proto-polar bear. It's either going to be something like a camel bear, some kind of a subspecies that's a little bit more bipedal than others. But I think the original Sherpa bipedal primate legends are actually based on Gigantopithecus.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because if you look at the geography, I mentioned this, the Sherpas come from a place called the Kham region, which borders Yunnan province. Okay? Now, Yunnan province is very important because next door to Yunnan, there's a province called Guangxi. Okay, very important because I lived in Guangxi for 7 months. Now, why is Guangxi famous? Do you know?
I do not.
Well, Guangxi is the home of Gigantopithecus. Okay?
Where they found the very few bones that we have of them. Right?
Exactly. There's only like 3 mandibles and 1,000 dragon's teeth. They were all found in central Guangxi, a place called Luizhou County. Okay, I lived in that area for 7 months. And and these teeth have been studied to death. Okay, now we know that Gigantopithecus lived there. It's very sure he had a greater range. Now, Yunnan province, which I just mentioned, in the south is a very tropical, subtropical region, and also that kind of connects with the Burma. So there's this whole zone where these creatures could have thrived, let's say 10,000 years ago, or 15,000 years ago. So my theory is a lot of these original the Sherpa legends are based on stories of Gigantopithecus, because it's actually next door to the Kham region,
right?
And so I think that there's twofold, and there's 2 parts. We have these ancestral legends that were brought over by the Sherpas, plus you have these tracks that were found were made by some type of identified brown bear. Because when you think about it, there is not one convincing Yeti trackway photographed.
Yeah, that's true. With the Shipton photos being not what they claimed they were. Yes, that is very true.
Show me. I mean, there might be 1 or 2. I saw some stuff on I think years ago on the Mysterious Universe program by Arthur C. Clarke. I actually have that. I have a DVD. There's some photos there, and this is from the show came out in 19. There's some photos there. I don't think I've ever seen them published. But but looking at kind of convincing Yeti trackways, I haven't seen maybe one. Maybe it was on that show actually, but they're just not there.
Right.
Okay, a trackway where you have some type of a decent looking track photo, something with toes on it, and some kind of a normal stride length that would indicate something, whether it's 6 feet, even if we were 6 feet, it would be adapted to mountains better than we are, would have significantly longer stride length than an average human trekking in that area. And that's never been shown.
I mean, unless they are smart enough to, everywhere they go, they cover their tracks somehow behind them, which sounds like a huge pain in the ass to me, but maybe they do that. Who knows?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's always, like I said, I believe there's a 1% chance it might actually be a bipedal creature of some sort. I'm actually more willing to accept the Telma. Okay, a small kind of biped living in the kind of subtropical regions. But the problem is those subtropical regions, because if you read about Yetis, they talk about the Aran Valley. Well, that area has been inhabited for thousands of years.
Right.
Even now, there's villages every few hours. There's a village there along the Aran Valley. And these are not subdivisions that were just popped up. These were around in the 1950s. They were around 100 years ago. And you would think that somebody, for example, I went to the Kathmandu Museum of Natural History, where they got all these mounted specimens that were shot, even 100 years ago. Right? You would have thought somebody, if these things were actually living in these subtropical valleys, which are now quite heavily populated, somebody would have shot one of these things.
Right. Or come across one dead, which is a common argument among the American Bigfooters, right?
Right, and so definitely, and because you see these, you see this museum, and you've got all these kind of trophies and stuff. I mean, somebody must have been able to. Because big game hunting was quite popular in this area up until the 1950s. Right, and
Right.
so I kind of dismiss the theory that they inhabit the Aran Valley, the tropical. Well, that's been inhabited for hundreds of years, and there's not one type of. We don't have any forensic evidence for the Talamas, even though their existence would be more likely than some kind of an Alpine ape.
Most of us, we want the Alpine ape, though. That is just such an incredible thing.
I want it as well. I mean, that's why I went out there, and I'm planning even a bigger expedition next year. Hopefully, we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I mean, I do want this Alpine ape to be existing. But right now, the odds are against us. I mean, there's just. I mean, look at the forensic evidence. We know all the so-called Yeti scalps. Those are man-made. The Ponbachi hand, that's actually from a monk. So there's almost nothing in terms of actual forensic evidence. And also, even worse, there's no photographic evidence.
Did you come up with that term, Dan? The Alpine ape? Is that yours?
I think so. Yeah, I haven't.
I've never heard of this before. I love that term, the Alpine ape.
I've used it before. I think I actually, because you're up in the mountains and you're saying it's like the worst ape. Like, why would an ape be living up here? But then again, you think about we have. I was just in Japan, and in Japan they actually had mammoths back in the. So why couldn't there be some kind of a cold weather hominid?
I mean, I think that there could be, if they're willing to deal with Florida heat and humidity and bugs, then why can't they be way up in the mountains? At least there's no bugs up there.
If elephants could live in the Arctic, during the ice,
exactly.
So there's always this possibility of some kind of a cold weather kind of
Alpine ape. I love it. What a wonderful term. You coined that. I don't think that you mentioned that on the first show. Maybe you did, and I've forgotten. But Alpine ape. I love that.
It's somewhere on my blog as well. I mentioned it somewhere on my blog on the Yetis. I did a couple of. I think it's my fourth trip to Nepal, actually to the Himalayas. But but so I mean, I'm always thinking, okay, if we could have mammoths and mastodon, which are basically tropical elephants, right? Why couldn't we have some type of a hominid that evolved to survive in cold weather? It's possible.
Absolutely, if he's fuzzy enough and he can find food, why not?
Right. I mean, if we can have elephants, living in during the Ice Age. Why couldn't we have, some kind of a huge hominid of some sort, a hairy hominid, an ape man of some sort? Yeah, an Alpine ape. But you kind of realize that, this is the completely wrong habitat for an ape, a primate to be living in. But like I said, after interviewing those Sherpas, and even my guide said, he had seen tracks similar to what we found on several occasions. So the door is still open that there actually might be some type of some type of unknown hominid running around in the Himalayas.
All right, so here's the second part of Luke's questions here. The other one that I wanted to touch on. Do you think that they pass through the mountains to get to feeding areas that they live? And we kind of just touched on this, but if they keep living on the peaks, how do they survive in such a landscape? But we just touched on that. But yeah, do you think that they're traveling back and forth through the various mountain ranges to get to feeding grounds and their homes, their quote unquote living rooms?
Well, that's why I went up to these high passes above the Barron Valley, because there are so the theory is they live lower down. At least the classic theory is that the man-sized ones, they live at more kind of tropical, subtropical regions, and they only venture when, the only time they actually go into super high altitudes is when they're passing over different valleys. And that's why I actually set up those cameras in that area, because I was above the Barron Valley connecting other smaller valleys just over the ridge. But they would have to be almost migratory, I think, nowadays. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the migratory lifestyle, in order to actually be evaded. Because, like I said, there's so many tourists flying into Nepal these days. It's somebody should be able to photograph something off in a helicopter, flying over some kind of creature walking. Oh yeah.
Well, and I want to make sure to share, I'm looking again, I've got your website pulled up, and I think that a lot of people, you think of the Himalayas, you think of Everest, you think of snowy peaks, and that's it. But honestly, especially in this shot here, it's like over a valley, and yes, the peak has snow on it, but everything in the foreground is very lush and green. It almost looks damn near like a jungle if you were to walk through it. So I think that there's a misconception when you say the Himalayas and the Yeti, and what would they eat? They'd be freezing all the time, but that's not true.
Yeah, well, it depends on the altitudes. I mean, when I was there, I mean, that same day we actually went down to the river. It was like probably around 60, 70 degrees, right? So there's a huge, the huge diversity. Okay, in terms of the biomes, you've got subtropical, or even tropical at the very bottom of the Aran Valley.
Yeah, which is really strange to think about, right? When you say Himalayas, you don't think tropical at all.
Yeah, you have. I mean, once you hit down to a couple of 1,000 meters above sea level, it's hot down there. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so you have all these, basically have from tropical up to alpine habitats. Okay, so so these creatures, if they would have to be moving around. I mean, some people subscribe to this. I think it's referred to the Wolverine theory.
What's heard of that one? No, I'm not familiar with that.
What they're doing is that they kill the food, they drag it up to the mountains like a deep freeze, and they leave the carcass up there. And then when they're hungry, they drag it down to warm, let it frost a bit, then they'll eat it again, and then they'll drag it up like a Wolverine apparently does.
That's interesting.
So yeah, different theories, but right now, I mean, there was actually not that much evidence. Even though it's been talked about since over 60 years now. There's actually very, very little, kind of strong evidence pointing to the fact that there could be some kind of a primate living in that kind of area.
That scenario just makes me think it's so frustrating that, we as humans, we lose teeth, and, our accidents happen. You age, and things start to degrade, and it's just too bad that in one of these Wolverine scenarios where they're, munching on something and then just toss it away, they don't realize they've lost a tooth in said body. But then, of course, it would take a human who gave, a shit really to pick up the body and find the tooth and not discard it. But it just makes you wonder if all these years, it's like, when is it going to happen? When will we get that shred of evidence that, okay, maybe there is a massive bipedal creature living up here?
Yeah, and the thing is now there's been so many advances in technology. I mean, now, they have DNA tests. Now they have what's called eDNA, okay, which is environmental DNA. So it's basically DNA left in the environment. And this is kind of the new trend now that they're trying to use now when they're looking for, for these hominids that possibly in the mud or in a small little puddle or in the snow, they could have left actually some eDNA, which could be analyzed now.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I mean, this technology has only been around for a couple of years now, and it's being applied now. There was a big expedition in Bhutan last year, which was just aired on television a few weeks ago, and they were using that technology there, the eDNA testing.
All right, so let's move on to, so this is from Mark Muncy. He was, of course, on the very last episode. He's the author of all of the Erie, Florida, and the new book, Freaky Florida. He wanted to know if you have met, and I might mispronounce this name, I apologize, Sir Brian, it's either Blessed or Blessed. Yeah, I guess he's a famed believer in the Yeti. Have you come across that gentleman at all?
No, I've never heard of the name. I Googled it as soon as I got the question. Apparently he's a kind of adventurer. He's quite elderly now, but he's still doing stuff. I'm not really sure what's his theory on the Yeti. Does he have any theories?
Actually, I did a cursory search as well on Google because I had also not heard of him being tied to the Yeti, but I knew he was an actor of some sort, which he is, but I don't know his stance on the Yeti at all. I was just doing that cursory search to see actually who he was and what he did.
Right.
Yeah. But maybe that's something I'll link a couple articles if people are interested in that.
Yeah, so I've never heard of him. I mean, he seems to be quite well known, but I've never heard of him. I mean, in terms of Yeti research or Bigfoot research, he must
be a British actor because isn't it if you have the word "Sir" in front of your name, you've been knighted by the Queen or whatever, right?
Yeah, so, very, very famous. Yeah, so yes. He has probably accomplished something amazing. I'm not sure what, but yeah. But I mean, he's quite. I think he's in his 80s actually. So I should have run into some of his stories, but I haven't.
No, neither had I. That's why it was pretty cool that Mark brought that up. I'm like, oh, I've never heard of this guy being tied to the Yeti. Okay, so my buddy Arno brings up the question about drones. And I think we've kind of touched on this already as far as the gear that you bring up. But have you ever utilized drones or might you in the future?
Well, drones are pretty expensive, at least the quality ones. I mean, you can get
Yes.
cheap ones that fly around for like 5 minutes and they crash.
Yeah.
But if
Yeah.
you wanted to get, I mean, I've been looking at them, and I noticed that the ones that are kind of in my budget, they're like, okay, flying time 5 minutes or something like that.
Yeah.
Those, sure, it's not even.
Yeah, there was when I went to Foxhole Farm, actually, Joe LeBlanc was flying around a drone over the house, and it was taking this incredible like 4K footage and this and that, and I was like, what is that? And he's like, it's a DJI Mavic Pro or something, and I looked it up, and it's like a $2,000 drone, which is that's not pocket change to most of us, which I'm not saying it was for Joe. I'm just saying that was a really nice drone. And he's like, yeah, here's the hover button, and it would just stay up there for as long as it. He's like, yep, I can let it hover, and then when it gets down on the battery, it'll just land itself. I'm like, that's what I would need, because I would be crashing that thing very, very often.
Yeah, I mean, I was at school, and some guy was flying one on the campus where I was teaching. And this one was also like $2,000, $3,000. I mean, it looked impressive, but you need to actually fork over that kind of money to get something worthwhile.
Yeah.
And for me, I mean, I'd rather buy an extra trail cam, or invest in another expedition for that. But I think they could come in handy. I know apparently now people are flying them in Sumatra on the Lake of Seven Peaks. So kids that actually are flying them over the lake there. But there's just too much jungle. You're not going to really see anything.
Right. That's the tough thing about that. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. It could be useful like in plantations possibly, or kind of open fields. But that border forest or jungles, maybe in Indonesia or even in the U.S., or some kind of more kind of open area, like some desert area, scrubland. I think that'd be great to use over there. But they're kind of impractical to be using it where there's thick jungle, or if there's like some serious, narrow mountain valley of some sort.
Right, and they're not the quietest things either, to be honest with you.
No, they're not.
You can't sneak up on anything with those. All right. Now I don't know if this is something that. I'm sure you're familiar with it, but the Dyatlov Pass incident, Corey,
right? He
was actually, and I don't know if you had a chance to listen to his encounters, but you would probably enjoy his. He was on episode 135. But the Dyatlov Pass incident up in the Ural Mountains in Russia, where the 9 hikers died very mysteriously. Right. They still don't know what happened. He was just going to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I heard about the story when when the internet came around about 20 years ago, and it kind of did pique my interest, and I did kind of follow it for a couple of years. But now thinking about it, I think if some kind of Yeti was involved, there would have been some major carnage.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Similar to what we used, like when we've all seen this on the internet. When there's like a grizzly attack, that type of stuff, really gory stuff where you have limbs, you have that it would have been a completely different scenario. If some kind of large carnivorous Yeti had come down there would have been, it would have been a massacre. I mean, it would not have been pretty. I mean,
yeah, and you bring that up. One of the major things about each of the bodies was there was no bruising. There was, except for the gal that was missing her tongue, of course. There was really no outward injuries. Just looking at them, it was all internal, like the crushed ribs and this and that. Right. So I think that's where the Yeti stuff came up. But you're right. I don't think that anything massive like a Yeti could create that much damage and be that stealthy and not leave marks on a body. I don't think it wouldn't think like that anyway.
No. I mean, and the best theory that I've seen, there's been apparently it's quite still a popular story in Russia. There was like some kind of research done just a few months ago on it. But the main theory, the best theory I've heard is that in this area there was actually some kind of military installation. Mm-hmm. Okay, and they were using parachute bombs. This is like 1959, right? Bombs that would detonate a couple of feet above the ground, causing some kind of a shock wave. Mm. And so my theory is one of these bombs went astray and killed some people, and then there was some kind of a military cover-up.
Yeah.
That to me is possible. Yeah, because they talk about that there was actually some kind of military installation not that far away, where they had been testing these parachute bombs that detonated, would have some kind of pressure wave of some sort. Right. And maybe these people were spooked by that. Maybe a couple were killed, and then maybe something happened. There was maybe a military cover-up afterwards. You don't know, but I'm kind of focusing towards there might have been some kind of military accident with some kind of a cover-up, and no Yeti involved.
Yeah, there's a movie. It's got horrible graphics once the quote unquote creatures come into play. It looks more like a bad video game, but the idea behind it is very cool, and it's basically what you're saying. It's called Devil's Pass, and actually, it's on. No, I take it back. It's not on Netflix right now. I'm sorry, guys. I always try to say, "Oh, it's on Netflix. Go watch it," because a lot of people have that. But they tied it in with these kids go up very recently to the very spot where the 9 hikers go missing. They start having a lot of weird stuff going on, and they find a door in the mountain, and they end up kind of going in. Some of the kids end up dying, and they tie it in with the Philadelphia experiment, which was like this whole time travel thing, where the guys supposedly got melded into the bulkhead of the ship. And so it was a cool take on it. But like I said, once the creatures come out, which are actually the soldiers and some of the Navy men, which is a nice little touch there. They're time travelers basically, but once they go through the tunnel, they turn into these carnivorous, murderous creatures. So interesting take on it, but yeah, I agree. I don't think there's any Yeti or massive bipedal creature in that scenario, but still, it's pretty amazing that after all these years, we still cannot figure out exactly what happened to those folks.
Yeah, I'm assuming there's some kind of cover-up involved. That's the way I'm looking at it.
Yeah.
It was a military installation, and I'm apparently they're still researching it. In Russia, it's still kind of a big story, and people are researching independently, and so on and so on. But yeah, so I don't think we'll ever know exactly what happened. It's quite just so many years ago as well.
Okay, now being me, I love this question. So Craig wants to know if while you've been out on any of your expeditions, you've seen any strange lights or UFOs while you've been out there.
I haven't, and I've asked whenever I do these, interviews, especially in Indonesia regarding Orang Pendek. I've asked people, "Have you guys seen some kind of orbs or kind of balls of light?" And they've said no. Okay, so I ask this question regularly. People, strange lights, then you see Orang Pendek. It just hasn't happened there.
Even though a lot of times, like you said, that would be more tied in with the supernatural than the other creatures we brought up.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, but no, there's no. Yeah, I mean, I've asked about it. It's funny because this kind of orbs and UFOs, it was quite popular back in the 70s.
Yeah.
And then for about a decade or so, it was just dropped completely. Nobody would even associate Bigfoot with orbs and stuff. And then it's come back the last 10 years, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of, because I remember even as a kid back in the 70s. I mean, even if you remember the $6 Million Man show, they had a scene where there's a Yeti jumping out of a Bigfoot jumping out of a flying saucer.
Yeah.
And this is like mid-1970s. So this was actually, the UFO Yeti Bigfoot connection was pretty strong back in the day, and then it kind of disappeared for about, I guess, 20 years. People say, no, it has to be a flesh and blood creature. And now again, we're discussing orbs and UFOs and other things associated with Bigfoot and Sasquatches. It's quite fascinating.
I know that we did touch on this your first visit, but people are probably going to go, well, what does he think about that then? So let's touch on it again for anybody that didn't hear the first episode, which I encourage everyone to go back and listen to that because we covered different things, different expeditions. I mean, what are your thoughts on that as far as these people that swear up and down? They're like, well, no, I did see a Bigfoot or a Pendek or a Gadang, and then it disappeared in a ball of light. Or, if you do come across those stories, do you entertain them at all, or do you think that these people are kind of wacky?
Well, I think these could be, two separate creatures. I think, in my opinion, the North American Bigfoot Sasquatch phenomenon, I think the door is closing very rapidly to prove that it's a flesh and blood creature. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I kind of believe, and once again, the habitat is all wrong, basically, especially in the Pacific Northwest. It's just not a habitat for a primate. And so I'm kind of open to the idea, the Bigfoot Sasquatch phenomenon, even the indigenous groups, the Native Americans, the First Nations up in Canada where I come from, they all believe that it's some kind of a paranormal entity or some kind of omen, some omen, especially when something, well, at least from what I've heard up in the Pacific Northwest, that people usually see Yetis after they've done something bad. They've done something bad or their group has done something bad, and then the kind of Yeti kind of shows up as an omen of some sort. So I think the Bigfoot Sasquatch probably is not a real animal, but possibly something more, something completely different that we don't know.
All right. Well, if you don't mind, we're gonna jump into the rock apes of Vietnam.
Yes, please do, because this is where I have the most bizarre information.
Yes.
Now,
so let's start like at the very basic. If people are going, what in the world is a rock ape of Vietnam?
Okay, well, Nguoi Rung is the Vietnamese name for rock ape. Now, actually, it means forest man. Okay, so Nguoi Rung translates to forest man. Now, rock apes are one of those creatures that they don't appear in the classic literature. Okay, if you read books from the 50s, 60s, 70s, there's no mention of rock apes. I first heard of them in the late 1980s. And it wasn't until the internet came around that the kind of rock ape stories started to come in, right? When did you first hear of them?
Actually, it was a couple of years. Well, I want to say maybe a year after I started to listen to podcasts, and then when I was on Sasquatch Chronicles, Will Jevning brought up the rock apes and some of the soldiers and their stories of the rock apes and how they would actually have to have lookouts and they get rocks thrown at them all the time. Thus, the name rock apes. Right.
Now, the thing is, though, there's been a lot of stuff written about rock apes. There's a lot of stuff on the internet. But at the same time, like as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, virtually no expeditions, at least not to the homeland of the rock apes, which is the Three Borders area. Three Borders region, which is basically Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. Okay, that's referred to as the home of the rock apes. This area where these three countries meet. And on the Vietnamese side, it's referred to as the Central Highlands. Okay, where a lot of these encounters happened during the Vietnam War. But at the same time, as I mentioned, nobody's actually been there to investigate, to interview, or even to check out these areas. Now, we know that there were a couple of Vietnamese scientists, professors of zoology, who had been researching it for decades. And one of them actually just passed away about a year and a half ago. And according to him, his most convincing evidence for the rock ape was found in 1980. So way back, 1980, on a place called Chu-Mon-Ray Mountain. Okay. So I first heard of this story about 20 years ago, about this professor finding, these tracks or a trackway on this mountain called Chu-Mon-Ray. So guess what happened last November? Can you guess what happened?
What?
Well, I actually climbed Chu-Mon-Ray Mountain.
Wow.
So
okay.
I had been researching this. For years. So this had been stuck in my mind. I've had this project on the back burner for over a decade now. But there was no recent reports. And I had this opportunity. Well, I've got like 10 days off. Why don't I do the rock apes? Even though there was like no information on this area. Stories saying off limits, foreigners aren't allowed, you'll be kicked out. So I said, okay, what the hell? I'll go there. If I get kicked out, I'll just go back to Ho Chi Minh City and I'll have a few beers and then I'll wait for my flight out.
Right.
So I came in there, not really expecting much, but even though I researched, I had poured through Google Maps. I had made a series of maps and I found kind of a back entry into the park as well as a B plan. In case I couldn't organize a proper formal trek or expedition, I would kind of sneak in and kind of do my own thing. So I got there and I did scout out the area and I actually found that kind of side entry into the forest. I trekked into there and I was just hanging around there thinking if I should go further. I had left all my stuff in my hotel. It's about 2 hours by bus. So I figured, okay, I'll come back here if I can't organize a proper official expedition. So the next day I go to the Wildlife Conservation Center just outside the park, right? And they were like so happy to see me. They said like I'm the second foreigner they've seen here like in 12 years.
Oh my gosh.
Right. They said somebody had been trekking here about, a couple of years ago, but second foreigner they've seen. And it was like a massive compound. They had like all these kind of cages for animals that were injured, but there was only a few animals. They had like I think it was a stump-tailed macaque. They had like a large python, a couple other monkeys, macaques. So this huge compound, a camping ground. And it was kind of an animal rescue center. And then you had this national park. So I asked them, I didn't mention anything about rock apes. And I said, guys, can I climb this Chu-Mon-Ray Mountain and possibly set up some trail cameras and make some photos? Because I'm quite interested in the wildlife and stuff. And they go, sure, no problem. We'll make a few phone calls and we'll let you know, like the next day. So the next day, I went there again. They said, yeah, we can do this trek. I got permission from the park rangers, from the head of the department. We can do this trek. So the next, I think it was the evening before we set out, I brought up the subject of rock apes. Shannon, are you still there?
Oh, yeah, I'm here.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I thought.
Oh, no, that's okay. I thought you dropped out there for a second.
No, yeah. So the evening before the trek, I brought up rock apes. And I'm saying, okay, guys, do you know anything about this Nugoirung, this rock ape? And the rangers all looked at me and go, yeah, they've heard stories about it. Some kind of a bipedal ape man lives in this forest. But I asked, have you seen any kind of tracks? Because these guys had been there for like 12 to 15 years, these rangers. And one of them actually had pretty good English. And he was telling me, no tracks, nothing. But one of the guys joining us tomorrow saw one.
Oh my gosh.
Right. So that was the cool thing. So initially I was like, disappointed. Oh, you didn't see any tracks or anything strange. But then they told me, well, one of the guys that's going on the trek tomorrow, because he's the most experienced guy in the area. And they actually hadn't been to the top of the mountain, they told me. So that's why they brought in this local guy. And he was in his late 50s. As an individual, he was actually a hunter, kind of well-known hunter in the area. I guess now you can't hunt there, but back in the day, back in the 80s, 90s, he was hunting in this area. And so the next morning, we were trekking. We start the trek, and the first 3,000 feet was kind of like mixed forest, where you have a lot of illegal cutting and stuff.
Right.
People, so you have like branches and dead, so not very pleasant. But we decided to take a break. I think it was about 3,000 feet, halfway up the mountain. We had a break. And so I thought this was the perfect opportunity to interview this guy, this hunter. So, and he told me the most amazing story, which is going to basically contradict everything we know about rock apes. So he told me that in 1982, when he was in his early 20s, he was hunting on Chumanuri Mountain, about halfway up, where this is the section where there's kind of like a rock face, which I actually seen a couple of days before from one of the trails. It's kind of a rock face on the mountain. So he was hunting there in 1982. He comes into this clearing near this rock face, and he sees two creatures. Okay, two creatures, shaggy-looking creatures. They're about 25 yards away, and he's watching them. They're like shaggy brown. Apparently, they had upturned kind of these snub noses, which is actually a feature of rock apes as well as the jungle giant. So he sees these creatures with kind of upturned noses. Very human-like looking faces.
Oh, wow.
Okay. The first creature, he says, was about 4 feet tall. Okay, 4 feet tall. The second creature, he said, was about 10 feet tall.
Oh, my gosh.
Right. And I'm going, can you repeat that again? He goes, yeah. The guy goes like 3 meters. And I go, 10, are you sure? Goes, yeah, the creature was about 10 feet tall. And he assumed that one was a juvenile. The one that was like 4 feet, which was like the classic rock. 4 feet tall was a juvenile, and the one that was like 10 feet tall was the adult. So like it's like, wow, I mean, this is like, I've never heard of this. I mean, this is totally this just doesn't fit the narrative. So he says he watched the creature for about a minute, and then they kind of walked off into the forest. All right, and so it's like brown shaggy hair, turned up noses, and one's 10 feet, the other one's 4 feet, and they kind of slowly walked away. Now, so he goes back to his village, and he tells his friends that he has his encounter. And then about a few weeks later, some wealthy guy comes up to him, some wealthy individual, and he offers him this huge sum of money to go and track and kill one. And he refuses. He says he refused to do that. He says he's not going to track and kill these because they're just too human looking.
Oh, wow.
Right. So even though they're shaggy, but just the impression, they have like an upturned stub nose, just the overall impression is that they're very, very human. So he says he turns down his offer, and this would be like 1982, that same year, and he turns down his offer of making some big money by tracking down and killing one of these for this individual. So he refused to do that. Subsequently, he never saw them again, and none of his friends have ever talked about seeing one. So he kind of told me that might have been the actual last sighting of a rock ape in that area.
Do you think that maybe some of his friends were either they were encouraged by him, or they got the hint that they shouldn't talk about it because look what happens when you talk about it. Someone wants to come in and pay you to go kill them.
Well, I mean, so many years have passed. I think they would have said something, It's not like last week, some guy asked me to kill a rock ape. And the fact that this happened years ago. This is 1982. So this is actually 2 years after that famous Vietnamese zoologist found tracks on the very same mountain, Chumanuri Mountain. So I think these things might have been around in that time. But I think if somebody would have seen them, there would have been more stories. And that's usually the case when I go somewhere. Somebody always mentions, hey, right. I've got another friend who saw something. And this is always the case. This is one of the reasons I go back to Indonesia all the time to investigate orang pendek, because there's always new information. Oh, I have a friend who saw one. This guy's got a friend. And there's even a very interesting interview I posted on my YouTube channel where me and Dali interview a local claim to have seen orang pendek just a few weeks ago before we interviewed him. So I felt that these guys were telling the truth. The fact that none of the rangers had seen one. Now, to even make things more fascinating, I asked this hunter if it was like a Bigfoot or a Yeti. And guess what? He didn't know what those things were. He had no clue Yetis or Bigfoot, nothing. Really? So this is a guy who's never read anything on Bigfoot. He's never read, and usually if you say Bigfoot in a foreign language, people understand it.
Yeah.
You go to Indonesia, you say Bigfoot. Yet this guy had no clue. And remember, this is an isolated village.
So that makes it all that more credible.
Exactly, because this is an isolated village. I mean, they all have internet now. I mean, one of the things that surprised me about Vietnam was they had internet connection everywhere.
Right.
But this guy had no idea what it was, had no idea what a Yeti was. But yet he's telling me he saw a 10-foot, bipedal creature with a smaller individual, almost 40 years ago.
That's crazy because I didn't catch that when you said the very end there, because since 1982, supposedly he's the last one to actually see one of these things. And that was one of the questions from Jonathan. He said, is there any modern encounter stories from either Westerners or locals? And that answers that. No, there is not any. Yeah,
I mean, there were stories coming out about a couple of years ago out of the Cambodian side of the Three Borders area.
Okay.
I contacted the NGO apparently, and they never got back to me. And I think they came to the conclusion that they were just bears. They were bear tracks. Okay. But yeah, I mean, there hasn't been anything. I mean, I know there was a researcher many years ago. He was way up north in the Annamite Mountains, which borders North Vietnam with Laos. Okay, this is called Annamite. It's very famous because he discovered the Sawala there in about 2002. Now, this guy was doing some research quite a few years, probably 20 years ago, and he came to the same conclusion that these things were around to like the mid-70s, and after all the conflicts, they kind of disappeared.
Huh. Well,
right. So my theory is, I think possibly, I mean, it's always possible that juvenile that was seen in 1982 might still be around.
Right. And if he found another one, hopefully they perpetuated some kind of a family, because you can't unless they do that. So,
yeah.
What about how remote are these areas? The Three Borders. Let's just take that whole area. How remote is that?
I'll tell you what. It's not as remote as you think. Okay, like I mentioned, this park is only 2 hours north of a city called Pleiku. Now, if you've read about the Vietnam War, this Pleiku was a very big U.S. military base.
Uh-huh.
Right. So this is only like 90-minute drive. Okay, so these areas are not very remote. I mean, even though apparently this area was off limits to foreigners. I mean, I walked, or I covered about half. I covered about a quarter of the park by foot in a few hours. It's all surrounded by little settlements where you have like little stores. You can get a Coke or whatever, a water. So the whole place is surrounded by these little settlements. But apparently, the interior of the forest, where that stream I was trekking up, that area is not investigated, not visited very often. Okay, so apparently just the periphery of the park is investigated or visited, but the deep center is not.
So in your opinion, I mean, if you have something that's 10 feet tall, and maybe you have a few things that are 10 feet tall and tromping around the Three Borders area, is it possible that they could get away with staying away from people and staying hidden? Is it remote enough for that?
Well, I'll tell you what, the Cambodian side, that's incredibly touristy now. There's people trek that area. There's YouTube videos of people trekking across. Right. I'm going to disregard the Cambodian side. The side on Laos, well, I was thinking of going there a couple of years ago, but what's happened now, they discovered gold in that national park.
Uh-oh.
And there's a couple of Chinese mining companies, having mines now in that park.
Is it even a national park anymore?
It supposedly is a national park, but now they've got, and you'll find people digging for gold, black operations happening in Indonesia. I've seen on many occasions. You're in the middle of the jungle, and you see an excavator there. Like, what the hell's going on here? And it's usually local people, local politicians or people who have contacts with mining companies. So the Laotian side, there's a gold mine there, and they've built these access roads, and there's trucks flying up and down. So after I read about that, I figured there's no reason to be going there.
Yeah.
And so it's very possible that this Chu-Man-Ray National Park, as it's known now, there's a possibility there might be some type of a Nugoirung still left in the deep center of the jungle. Because, like I said, they go to the park mainly for the waterfall, just on the periphery of the park.
Mm-hmm.
And even on this trek, they brought in this hunter because the guides, the rangers themselves, had not been to that top of that mountain. And now the interesting thing is, on the top of this mountain, there's actually the remains of a U.S. jungle camp, which you can see on my video there on YouTube.
That is cool. How long is it? So that's been there since Vietnam, obviously.
Yeah, apparently it's some kind of wood, but it was treated with something. Okay, So you see these kind of like, you can see on the video clip, very short clip, and apparently also a helicopter crash, but was salvaged just a few years afterwards, or right after it crashed. So that there were bits and pieces of metal. So that mountain, that top was incredibly windy. It was actually incredibly cold as well. You can see the wind on that video there. So there was actually a U.S. jungle camp up there, military camp up there, and that area is kind of a little bit more open, kind of windswept. So I'm assuming if these Nugoirungs they would probably prefer lower down by the river, a little bit more warmer climate.
I think if you were a soldier, you wouldn't want to get stationed at that base, right?
Right. The thing is, there's no water supply up there.
Yeah.
And even when I was trekking, we had problems because they had the helicopter and supplies, I guess, during the war there. So even when we were there, I was running out of water. And then for some silly reason, we spent like 3 hours looking for water. We should have just gone straight back. Would have saved 3 hours.
Well, hindsight's 20/20, right?
Yeah. So, there is this, like I said, there's a river valley that goes deep in the middle of the jungle, which is very rarely visited, even by these rangers. So there's still a possibility there might be this kind of giant rock apes. I kind of think that these rock apes that were encountered by during the war might have actually just been juveniles.
Yeah, so would you mind touching on really quick just some of the encounters that the soldiers had during the Vietnam War with the quote-unquote rock apes?
Well, the thing is, I've read quite a bit about it, but it seems the stories are all very similar. They're at night, and they encounter these 4-foot-tall creatures, kind of chimp-like in appearance, very aggressive, throwing rocks. And it seems that's kind of the common thread of all these stories. Yeah. I don't think there's any reports of a giant, 10-foot biped. But I think based on this investigation, I'm pretty convinced this guy actually saw a 10-foot biped there, bipedal creature. And I believe my opinion is that these Nugoirung, these rock apes, are actually these jungle giants. As opposed to saying we have all these different species, why couldn't we just have one species of giant that you find in Vietnam? It's been recorded. Tracks have been recorded in southern Sumatra, also been recorded in Malaysia. Very typical climate, kind of a mixture of highland versus lowland jungle. The theory is they kind of stay up in the.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
The one theory is kind of that these they stay up higher altitudes, and then when there's dry seas, they come further down to get the water and so on. But I kind of believe that the rock apes are actually these orang dalams, orang mawas, orang gadangs, whatever you want to call them.
Well, and I love that idea where you're like, let's simplify this, and it's only 3 or 4 or 5 different types, tops, and the ones that the soldiers came across are probably hormonal teenagers. They're just not 10 feet tall yet and not able to control their hormones, so they're angry and coming in contact with all these guys that are probably shooting off rounds and being loud and smoking cigarettes, which is an interesting part because you brought that up earlier with one of your expeditions, and also it's come up on my show with people that have run into Bigfoot. And, it's kind of like one of those things where you're going, well, it's an attractant and maybe an irritant at the same time, and it seems to maybe piss them off.
Yeah, exactly. These creatures are juveniles, are immature. They've never seen humans before. Yeah. So they get aggressive, right? And there's a group of them, so they feel confident. It's not just one. You know how it is when you're teenagers, you aggregate,
you gang up.
Right, you're doing group activities, unless you're kind of a loser or something.
Yeah.
But you're kind of sitting in the park reading a book or something. But yes, I was thinking about this. I'm pretty sure that these rock apes were probably just kind of juveniles. First time they've seen a human, they're still kind of rowdy, aggressive. They pick up rocks, start throwing at because I don't think there's any report of a person being attacked by a rock ape.
Right, they never came into a camp as far as I've come across either. So. It was
Right.
kind of this periphery attack that they would do on the soldiers.
Right. They're surprised. They don't know what to do because they're immature. They don't have the experience yet. And what do they do? Well, they pick up a rock. They pick up rocks and start throwing rocks. That's as far as it goes. They don't go for venture in there. They throw a few rocks and they hide back in the jungle. So I'm pretty confident that, like I said, that these rock apes are actually these 10-foot tall jungle giants, and that the encounters that happened during the Vietnam War era were actually of juveniles.
You know, I love that theory about the whole thing. I didn't know that that's what you were going to say, so I find that much more compelling and interesting. And gosh, let's go there. Let's go to the Three Borders area, because that's fascinating.
You know, surprisingly, it's probably the cheapest investigation I've done, and you just need to pay a visa to get to Vietnam. You know, so it's one of those things, and I'm very, very surprised. I mean, after I did this, even before I went, I was surprised. Why hasn't any of the big name cryptozoologists gone out there? Because even in terms of TV shows, there's only been like a couple of them the last 10 years, right?
Right. And
for some reason, even when they did these shows, they went to a completely different area. They went to the wrong area.
Do you think maybe there's a stigma, or they assume it's dangerous somehow? I wonder why they don't go in there.
I think it has to. Well, the thing is, when you kind of research cryptozoology, you'll find out that a lot of the famous cryptozoologists, once they start making a name for themselves, they almost stop doing investigations.
Right. Yeah. They just get so busy with the interviews and the TV stuff.
Right. And yeah, I mean, even if you go back, even if you read about Ivan T. Sanderson, who's like one of the father of cryptozoology. Mm-hmm. I mean, he used to collect specimens for museums and stuff. But once he started getting into cryptozoology, all of his international activity stopped.
Yeah.
So you see this trend. I've noticed this, that once the people make it big, they can drop all the actual investigations. I mean, for example, 2 years ago, about 2 or 3 years ago, they founded the new version of the International Cryptozoological Society. Have you heard of them?
Yes.
And they have yet to do one expedition.
Yeah.
Since their founding. Right. And the old version, there was another version that went defunct back in the 90s, I think. They actually did stuff back in the 80s. I think they did some stuff in the Congo. But this new version of this, they're asking for $100 membership. They're sending some kind of periodical. Then they have this overpriced conference. But yet these guys haven't sponsored one domestic, North American expedition, nothing international. It kind of makes you wonder, what is their motive?
Right.
Right. Why are you not funding? And because this Vietnam rocket, flying to Vietnam gets so many tourists. A majority of those are from the States, actually. A lot of people come there, you go back and look at, different sites during the war and so on. So it gets a lot of tourists. And Vietnam is like the cheapest place to go.
Of course, I guess.
In terms of hotels and food. And so it's one of those places that there should be expeditions happening almost like on a monthly basis. Somebody flies in there and they check in there and they investigate something.
Right. But I guess it doesn't speak very well to going on an expedition when the last person to talk about it says that he's had a sighting in 1982, right?
But nobody knows that, though.
That's true. That is true.
The thing is, though, when you read stories about rock apes, there's just, like I said, there were stories coming out of Cambodia. You still get the impression that these things are around.
Right.
It's kind of like some.
Well, and they could be. They could be.
Nobody. I went there because I wanted to know, because I had heard stories out of Cambodia, but I haven't heard anything really fresh.
Yeah.
Out of at least that part. I figured, well, nobody's actually been there, because when I Googled it, there was nothing in English on the park. And when I Google Translate, it came out that it may still be off limits to foreigners. So so basically, nobody knew that. You would have thought there would be something more recent, but no, there haven't been any recent reports. None of the rangers had seen anything. So I can say that if there are rock apes, there might be just one or two individuals left deep in the center of Chumanray National Park, and it's still, like I said, it'd be worth investigating again for sure.
But like you said, considering what this hunter went through in 1982, and he's going, no, I'm not going to take you just because you want to write me give me a blank check for however much money to go kill one. Maybe that really got passed down so strongly, around the park rangers and the other hunters and the locals, that they just know not to talk about it. It's just a guess, but maybe that helped to tamp down some of the reports.
You know what? This park gets very few visitors, and this guy was asking me if I could kind of promote it as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because they have. And I'll give you a perfect example. Because if you want to do animal conservation, you have to pay for it in most places.
Right.
You know, if you want to help out. This guy, I was saying, it'll be great. I asked him, maybe I'll try to get some, maybe get people, advertise this park, maybe he'll come in there, do some animal conservation. That would be fantastic. He gave me his email. It was not like, hey, get out of here after the expedition. He gave me his email. We actually mailed a few times after.
Huh.
So basically, they have animal conservation center. So I'm sure if tourists want to come in there, you pay a minimal fee. You could camp there. You could help out with animals, and it wouldn't cost you anything. A lot of people go and do this kind of ecotourism in Southeast Asia, where they help out, these kind of animal rescue centers, and they're actually paying big bucks for it.
I can imagine.
Yeah, and there's always and this guy this guy would probably be more than happy if people came down there. He was backpacking through. You stay at the park, you help out with the animals. And then possibly you could even do a trek.
Oh, that would be amazing! I would love to get out there sometime.
Well, yeah, let me know, because, like I said, Vietnam, it's part of that kind of backpacker route of Southeast Asia.
Right.
I mean, I have colleagues here in Bangkok. What people do now is they fly out to Vietnam and they rent motorbikes, and they do these motorbike tours.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so that's a very popular thing to do. Is you fly in there, you rent a motorbike, and you drive around for 2 weeks. On motorbikes, and you cover half the country, actually. The whole
right.
country. So like I said, it's probably, in my way, this was actually in some ways like probably one of the easiest investigations I've done. I just took the bus, got off, took a motorbike took a motorbike for about 20 minutes, got off and I started talking to these guys. They were really friendly. They were happy to see a foreigner there. So it's one of those things that it was could be very easily arranged. And if you know of anybody who would be interested in doing a Rock Ape expedition, let me know.
It's so interesting to hear a man say, oh yeah, there was the one, the 4 foot tall, and you're going, okay, yeah, that's in with the stories we know of the Rock Apes. And he's like, oh yeah, but that's, I think, the juvenile. There's the 10 foot tall one. I've never heard that before.
I was as shocked as, I think there was something lost in translation there. So I asked the guy, and he goes like, they were using the metric system, 3 meters, which is like 10 feet.
Yes.
And I go, yeah. Oh, was it? He goes, yeah, it was 10 feet tall.
You're like, excuse me?
And then I go, yeah, exactly. And he goes, well, he assumed that one was like the baby, the baby Rock Ape, and that was the full-grown adult.
Wow.
Right. And in some ways, and I figured, and when he mentioned the upturned noses thing, I'm going, well, that's kind of what's being discussed about the orang mawas, the orang dalam, and the orang gadang. And so, so automatically I'm thinking, these Rock Apes, these are not Rock Apes. They're just these jungle giants.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to kind of stick to that theory that these creatures are actually, this whole area. I mean, there was something that was known as the Sunda landmass, where you had Borneo, Sumatra, Malaysia. They were all connected, right? And so it's very probable that there were these creatures, these jungle giants living in that landmass, and then split apart afterwards. But so I kind of believe that these Rock Apes are actually orang dalams, orang mawas, giant jungle giants.
I love that sentiment, and I hope that they're out there. Just like the Yeti, though, I don't want it to be a bear. I just don't.
Yeah, I'm hoping as well. But like I said, the odds are stacked against us. But I'm still going to try. I'm looking forward to doing a big Yeti expedition next summer. Hopefully, that's the plan. But yeah, I still think that there's a possibility. But at the same time, I still think the number one candidate for discovery is still the orang pendek.
Right. And you know what? You're an amazing segue artist, because I was just going to swing to a couple of the questions for the orang pendek.
Perfect. Okay.
So Jonathan wants to know regarding the orang pendek, is there any sense of urgency to find evidence considering their habitats are under threat?
Well, it's kind of yes and no. There is a lot of habitat loss, but at the same time, I'm not really pressured to be doing expeditions every a couple of times per year, because there's actually nobody looking for it systematically.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so it's basically me. There was quite a few people looking for orang pendek about 15, 20 years ago.
Yes,
but they've all given up. And I've been doing it since 2011, and basically it's just me and my Indonesian colleague Dali. And also habitat loss. Yes, it's happening, but there's still a lot of remote areas that haven't been explored. Our last expedition, we went down to a completely different area, because the classic area, the home of the orang pendek, the Lake of Seven Peaks, that now is basically just a very touristy area, people camping up there. So for me, I've completely given up on that region. Mm-hmm. So there's still lots of areas to explore. And plus, there's also some bizarre reports coming out of northern Sumatra. I think there was a question about that as well. Lauren. You have Lauren's question there.
Oh, the video.
Right.
Yeah, she referenced the video. Yeah, Lauren sent along a YouTube clip. It was through my Instagram for you, and if I describe this, people might know right off the bat what I'm talking about. It's two people on dirt bikes, and they're on a trail in the middle of the jungle, and there is a creature that kind of runs across the trail while this gentleman, I'm assuming, has some sort of a GoPro or something on his helmet.
Exactly.
And it kind of skitters across your field of vision. So she was wondering, what you thought of that. Could that be a person running that fast?
Okay, actually, I know quite a bit about this because this was supposed to be my project for July. Okay. And unfortunately, it fell through because I couldn't get the paperwork done. Now, this video came out last year in March. I think it was March.
Mm-hmm.
It was filmed up in the Aceh region of North Sumatra. So Aceh region is a region that doesn't get many tourists except for a couple of islands up there. And it was basically some guys on a motorbike with a GoPro on their handlebar, on their helmet, I'm not sure. And they were on a plantation near the jungle, and they almost ran over a little pygmy person. Now, these pygmies in this region are known as suku mante. Okay, in my previous show, I talked about suku oni. Mm-hmm. Okay, of Sulawesi. This is called a suku mante. Suku just means tribe. Mante, I'm not sure what it is. So it's basically the Mante tribe. Okay. So supposedly these are humans. Okay, or possibly maybe something like a Homo erectus, pygmy form, that have some limited technology. They have fire. Apparently in the video, the thing is wearing a loincloth, holding some kind of a spear in his hand. So yeah, so this has been this is a large part of folklore in Indonesia about these pygmies, and so this video came out last year. I was intrigued by it, so I was kind of planning to do a big project there this summer, and I contacted about 12 different trekking agencies because about 150 miles further south, there's orangutans. Okay, there's orangutans in that area, so there's a lot of trekking agencies doing these orangutan tours. Lake Toba, Gunung Lesser National Park. So there's a lot of trekking agencies. So I emailed at least a dozen of them. 2 of these guys got back to me, said they could probably help do the project. One guy said he could do it, but I have to get the paperwork myself. Mm-hmm. Which I told them that's not part of the deal. I mean, you're a trekking agency. That's kind of your responsibility, isn't it?
That's why you pay them. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And I mean, and they were asking quite a bit of money actually. So I told them, okay, I mean, if you guys can get the permits, I don't mind waiting a day or two. But in this day and age with the internet, you should be able to get like 80% of the stuff done. You know, just kind of show up, maybe sign some papers, and you're good to go. But this guy said no, he can't. This area, it's off limit to foreigners. You'd have to get the permit yourself. I didn't want to spend 2-3 weeks in a small town waiting to get a permit.
Right.
And possibly you get the permit, you go into this jungle area, you meet some rangers, they'll tell you got the wrong permit.
Right.
Right, so it's like, okay, I'm not going to do this unless I'm like 90% sure, or at least 80% sure that guys can get me the permit. Now, I had a second guy who who said he could do everything for me, but each time I emailed him, he would just send back a smiley face.
Gosh, you're like, thank you.
Yeah, it's like, okay, excellent. Can you get the permit? And he's like, smiley face, okay. And then the date I said I would arrive, he actually called me, but I didn't even bother picking the phone up because I had sent him like 4 or 5 of these emails, like, can you actually arrange this trek? And what happened, I got one of my friends, I found have some contacts in the area, and they actually went to where his office was. It wasn't even an office, it was just like a house, little sign on it. So it was a guy claiming to be, so it was like, okay, do I really want to risk flying over there and maybe not getting anything done? And of course, what will happen, they'll offer you an orangutan trek or something. Oh, yeah, we can't take you in the deep jungle there, but we can show you some orangutans. I've seen that already. I mean, it's great if it's your first time, but I'm doing this for almost a decade now. It's like, I'm here for a different reason.
Right.
So I had to scrap the thing, but I'm thinking, maybe I could go down there illegally, try it by myself. Because I was scanning maps for like 6 weeks. You could probably sneak in there, but you would have to take somebody with you. But this area apparently is not the friendliest area. Okay, this region, for many years there were oil companies in this region. Maybe you've heard these stories from like the 90s and so oil companies that were there, foreign oil companies, and they had private security groups that were actually kind of killing people who were protesting them, right?
Yeah.
So I think this kind of, rightly so, they have this kind of negative attitude. They don't want foreigners in here because they've experienced all these negative things. and also that area is under Sharia law.
Oh, what's that?
It's a very very kind of strict, for at least for Muslims, very strict, right? So you can't buy beer there, and so it's one of those areas. And there's been a lot of really weird stories coming out. Just a couple of months ago, some villagers killed a tiger. They thought it was some kind of a shape-shifting demon tiger of some sort.
Oh God! I didn't hear that story. They thought it was a shape-shifting demon.
Yeah, it was. I'll see if I can find a link. I'll send it to you afterwards.
Wow.
But yeah, this area is kind of, even my friend, she told me that you don't want to be trekking alone there.
Mm-hmm.
And she told me she's not, the person that was helping me out organize it, and she said, no, you don't want to be going there by yourself, sneaking in there by yourself.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, I had to kind of give up on it. I'm still reconsidering. I'm going to see if I can contact some new trekking groups. We'll see, because this, it's very fascinating. This whole video is very fascinating. But there's one problem with the video that I have. You've seen the video yourself, right?
Yeah.
Okay. The only problem that I have, because I've been camped out on plantations like that for many, many times.
Mm-hmm.
The only problem I have is you can hear everything a mile away.
Yeah.
So because I've had camera traps set up, and if I hear some dude on a motorbike going to that plantation, I get up and I'm running towards my trail camps.
Right. And this is 2 motorbikes.
Right. So I find it very, very difficult and these motorbikes are super loud. Okay, especially the ones they have in Indonesia. So I can't see how 2 guys on a remote plantation on super loud dirt bikes could have surprised this pig in the Sukumante. I just find that very difficult to believe. I can understand if they were walking, if they were trekking quietly, silently. That's how people encounter these orang pendeks, right? That's why you never see them in the forest, but they will always hear you. But here it's like, okay, if you're walking, you're walking rather quietly, you're not making much noise, you could probably, surprise these things, but not on 2 bikes.
No.
So that's the only reservation I have, is that how are these guys able to surprise this thing when you can hear this thing a mile away?
Right.
You actually do hear. You'll hear people with chainsaws, miles away, cutting, in the forest and stuff.
Right.
And then these motorbikes, you'll hear them miles away, and it gives you time to kind of get up and get your trail cameras and make sure that nobody takes them. So yeah, that's my biggest issue. But even though the area does have a tradition of these pygmy tribes that are called the Oni tribe, the Sukumante. But but the thing is though, when I was researching this, there's some incredibly deep jungle there, virtually unexplored, that borders these plantations, because the actual location was never disclosed.
Oh, of that video.
Yeah, it was because I had my Indonesian friends research it for me. They had to translate it, and I had to translate it. So the guy who actually filmed that video, he said approximately where it was. It was kind of west of Medan, this jungle area, but he never actually gave a specific location.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and so his explanation was that he doesn't want people bothering these things. Okay, that was his explanation. There was also you conducted with an anthropologist from one of the local universities. He also mentioned something. I was actually contacted on anthropologist. He also said these things should not be investigated.
That's what he said?
Well, in the interview, these things should be left alone.
Oh.
Actually, I had his email. He's a professor of, I think, anthropology at one of the local universities there, not far, like 100 miles from this area where this encounter took place. So it seems to me that these things people don't want these things to be investigated there.
See, but don't they realize that when they send out correspondence like that, it just adds to the mystery and you thinking that, okay, so there really is something to this if you're going to send me correspondence like that. Yeah,
I mean, that's kind of, that even entices me to like, hey, I need to be going out there.
Yeah, right. That's no way to send me away. That makes me want to go more.
Right. If there were like several TV crews down there already, which theoretically there should have been.
Right.
Then okay, I'm not going to worry. There's been like 3 or 4 TV crews down there. It's been shown a couple of there's been a couple of shows made on it or something like that. Then I would have kind of forgot about it. But the more I researched, I found out how remote this area is, and that the approximate vicinity of this area, there's actually some incredibly deep jungle with 3 dormant volcanoes side by side. And there's almost nothing on it. So I asked this guy, these agencies, and they said, well, they can arrange the guide, the porter, $100 a day, but they can't get the permits for him. So I'm actually seriously thinking possibly maybe sneaking in. But you would have.
Be careful doing that.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a possibility. The thing is, the rangers, I've encountered rangers many, many times. They kind of work like 9 to 5 kind of thing.
Right.
So, yeah, the worst thing, I mean, the only time you get into trouble is if you're like moseying around some village at noon or something.
Right.
You need to be, I mean, I've had situations where we started trekking at 3 in the afternoon. It was like the worst thing to do. People stop you. But if you go out there in the morning, you hit the jungles at 5 a.m., 5:30. You'll get in there and just make sure you sneak out in the evening as well. You should be okay. But yeah, I mean, there are ways around it. But I would prefer to have a proper team coming in there.
Yeah.
Proper team with people, and you also need local know-how. You need because nobody's actually been to these areas. That's the thing.
So, you said some of these. I mean, no foot has ever touched, right?
I mean, there's probably been people in there, but there's these tracts of jungle that just look so unpenetrable, right? And I mean, that would be the proper place. You'd have highland jungle, you've got lowland jungle, you've got a waterway. You need to have water. You've got caves, because that's where these creatures apparently live. They live in caves. Apparently they have fire. And apparently they might be even nocturnal in some cases.
Right. Well, yeah, huge thanks to Lauren for sending that video along. She's actually one of the hands over at the Gralien Report with Micah Hanks. So thanks so much, Lauren. All right, so if you don't mind, let's end on Bruce Kelly. He sent an entire email specifically for you over to me. So he's got a few different very cool questions for you. So do you ever trek into Australia, regarding the Yowie? Have you ever been? Will you ever go? Do you have any thoughts or theories on the Yowie?
I'm not sure if I mentioned, but I did do two investigations, and I might be actually planning a third one. Now, what do we know about Yowies? I've been to the so-called hotspots, which are the Blue Mountains, just outside of Sydney, and then there's another area which is more subtropical, known as the Gold Coast hinterlands.
Yes.
So this is kind of south of Brisbane, particularly one place called Springbrook National Park, where supposedly there's been a history of Yowie reports. So I've done both of these things. I've set up cameras in both areas. I've interviewed rangers, and it doesn't look good.
And by doesn't look good, what do you mean by that?
Well, first of all, I mean, if you, according to the rangers, they haven't seen anything. The Blue Mountains are quite busy. The southern part of the Blue Mountains is very, very busy. There's a lot of tourists there doing, especially on weekends. So I think there might be a possibility of some of these Yowies living up in the northern Blue Mountains. Mm-hmm. Okay. But the fact that there's quite a bit of tourism happening in these places, and there's also very, very little in terms of evidence being photographic, even tracks. There's only like 3 or 4 Yeti tracks that have been or casts that are actually considered to be authentic. So there's very, very little in terms of if you actually look at it, if you study it, you realize it's almost nothing there in terms of actual, even videos. There was a video that was broadcast a couple of years ago, I think about a year ago, of a Yeti apparently eating something in the forest. And it was.
What did you think about that?
Well, it looked kind of cool, but then it was explained it was actually an owl.
Oh.
Yeah, you might actually see that video. It looks kind of, at first when you look at it, it looks like these giant eyes moving back and forth, something, but it was an owl actually.
Did they actually title the video, Yeti eats blah, 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 or Yowie eats, whatever?
It was like
and then it was an owl.
Yowie. It was a Yowie. Right. So there's a lot. It kind of parallels the North American Bigfoot Sasquatch. So there's a lot of people actually faking stuff. Okay.
Daniel, was it you that I'm pretty sure it was, but when I was on Sasquatch Chronicles, we talked to a man named Jamie, and he had I'm not going to remember the name of the place that he had this encounter, but it basically consumed him and it overtook his life, and he kept going back there, and he was tying balloons, and he was setting up stuff to
right.
I think it was you that I talked to you about Jamie, and I was like, if you get hold of him, maybe you guys can go out there. Did you? I don't even know if I talked to you about this, but did you ever touch base with him, and what did you think about that whole situation?
Well, I believe we actually corresponded about this, and you mentioned that he couldn't give me the place because he had moved to some different place.
Oh, so that's right. He moved across the
Right. So
Yes,
because
yes.
for me, when I'm researching stuff, it's very, for me, one of the key things is location. And I know you
Right.
mentioned that he didn't actually didn't tell you the location because he had moved out or still doing some studies there. So I never did actually contact him. I don't know. Did he actually mention the place in the podcast?
No, he didn't. Just
Yeah.
mostly because it wasn't like he was like, it's, how some researchers are like, it's mine, it's my place.
Right. Right.
It was more like it was such a traumatizing event,
Right.
because his
Right.
family was out there that he didn't want
Right.
anyone else to go through it. But damn it, I forgot about that whole moving situation and all of that. I still am in contact with him, so I could still
Yeah, because,
throw the line out there if you wanted to. I'm so sorry. I forgot that, yeah, he moved and everything just lost
right.
touch.
Because for me, because Australia is a pretty big place.
Yes.
It's massive. It's a beautiful country. And yeah, and the thing is, you need to have kind of relative specific regions to go to, or specific areas if possible. And I know that I didn't get the exact or relative region where it was. Was it?
No, it wasn't
Sydney?
even relative, I don't even think. It
Yeah.
was just
So
like
as I
a
was
coast or something, and it's all a coast. I mean, if you go to the
right.
ends,
Right. If you could get the specific location from it, I'd be more than happy, because I'm actually planning a trip to Australia, possibly even maybe this year or next year.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the Yowie, I mean, it's up there for me. I mean, the thing is, Australia is such an amazing place. You got different habitats that you can only find in Australia. All these different marsupial animals and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I mean, the information that I have from rangers is the place to go is a place called Mount Warning.
Interesting name, right?
Yeah, Mount Warning. Yeah, and apparently it's also apparently this area is famous for kind of like UFOs and also Yowie encounters. So I think that would probably be the best place to go, and then possibly the northern portion of the Blue Mountains, which is kind of more isolated than the southern portion. Because I spent like a week trekking in the southern. I spent setting up trail cameras. Then I went on a holiday and I came back, picked them up, and all I got was a feral cat. So yeah, I think. But yeah, I mean, there's also this. The funny thing is, I was actually set the cameras up in a famous gully, or near a famous gully, where apparently there's been these Yowie reports for decades. Since the 1990s. Actually, it's just by a subdivision, and I was actually in that area as well, and I set up some cameras in that region as well. But yeah, nothing came out. But yeah, I mean, there's just a lack of. There's no blob squatch videos, just a lack of photographic forensic evidence to entice you. And the other thing is, I'll tell you a story. Before I actually did the first Yowie investigation, I contacted a cryptozoological society in Australia. Right? And the guy told me there, don't waste your time with Yowie, just focus on the orang pendek.
No way. And this is a guy that he's part of a cryptozoology association there in Australia.
I can't remember which one it was. And this was like before, because Australia is pretty expensive, so I wanted to kind of get as much information as I got there. So it was some kind of cryptozoological society of Australia or something like that. And I emailed the guy, and he goes, "Well, just go back to the orang pendek."
Maybe he's being very protective of his area, though. Maybe he just didn't want you there.
Yeah, but I felt he was being honest, and he was, he said he's really fed up with the research in Australia. There's nobody's ever come up with anything. And so, and he's best just don't focus on the orang pendek. And this is also what the rangers told me. They told me, yeah, they can believe some kind of a primate in the jungles of Indonesia, but they're not going to accept some primate in their backyard where they've been working there. They work there 40 hours a week, clear remote trails. Because every year they have storm damage there, so they're clearing these remote trails for hikers. And they told me they had never seen anything to even indicate some kind of a large Bigfoot-like creature was in the area. But at the same time, they said, okay, why don't you go to the Blue Mountains, or not to Mount Warning, where one of my buddies actually saw one a couple of years ago. So.
Oh, well, yeah. Right. So you're like, oh, wait, so you say this, but then it's like, go to Mount Warning.
I think possibly because Mount Warning has a long history of and so that's possibly, and it's around the Gold Coast, and there's actually I think it's like a youth hostel within a few miles of the actual mountain. But that area is very well developed, though. There's basically only one hiking trail, and the whole area is surrounded by private farmland.
What kind of a mountain is this? I mean, it's called Mount Warning, but is that just a nickname?
I don't know. I think it might have to do. I'm not sure. It might have some kind of superstitious kind of background. I mean, people have experienced. Yeah, so it's kind of like, I think it'll be very similar to like Mount Shasta.
Gotcha.
That you have in California. Yeah. So there's missing people reports, orbs, strange creatures. And that's something I've been thinking about. I would love to go. I drew through Mount Shasta decades ago, and that's something I would love to do. If you'd be interested in some kind of a American-based expedition.
Yeah, I could drive up there. That would be easy.
I would join you for sure. Even that missing stuff. Is it missing 511?
Missing 411. Yeah, with David Pilates. Yeah.
Right. Lost stories are, I think, one of the most lost stories in that area as well. People disappearing.
Absolutely, a lot of weird stuff at Mount Shasta.
Yeah, and so for me, that would be the place. In some ways, I find that more kind of more plausible than say the Mount Warning, which is a small mountain, covered by plantations, private farmland, one trekking trail. While Mount Shasta, that whole area, that's a pretty big expanse of forest there.
So when I think of Australia, and I joke a lot about Florida, I love Florida, but I'm always saying it's a joke, but it's not, that everything wants to kill, bite, maim, it's very dangerous. I think of Australia as even more amplified than Florida. But obviously people are going out, they're camping, they're hiking, they're doing the outdoor stuff. So it is a little concerning if we haven't really had any recent reports of the yowie.
Yeah, you would think it was, Aussies they're really kind of sporty.
Yeah.
They're all working out, either they're surfing or they're hiking or mountain biking. So there's a lot of people doing outdoor activities there, a lot of people. And you would realize now with all the technology with these GoPros and action cameras and stuff that people would be reporting these things, or at least getting something similar to that Sukumante video we saw. The guy on a motorbike.
Right. Right. At least something. Even if it's kind of nefarious footage, nothing has even come out of there.
Right. So there's been really nothing that's kind of like, wow, I've got to really go there now because this guy photographed something. Or even with casts, they only have a handful of casts. It's not like in North America or BC where people have hundreds of different casts.
Yeah.
So apparently there's like a handful of casts. And there's a lot of variation, sometimes 4 toes, sometimes 3 toes. But the main thing that I learned when I was there is that a lot of the cryptozoologists there, they don't believe it's a primate. They believe it's some form of megafauna, marsupial megafauna.
What's the difference, though? A megafauna marsupial versus what we think it is?
Marsupial, megafauna is those little giant animals that existed about 10,000 years ago.
Okay.
Mammoths are megafauna. Right. So in Australia, they also had their own giant wombats and stuff.
Right.
Okay. So they had all these oversized animals like we had in North America. They also had them, but they were marsupials, little pouches.
Oh, right? Okay.
Right. So their theory is this is like a relic megafauna, okay, that kind of looks like a gorilla, but it's not. It's actually a marsupial. Okay, so it kind of through conversion, it kind of looks like superficially kind of resembles a gorilla, but it's actually some type of a marsupial creature.
Which, for a researcher, if you went there and spent weeks and thousands of dollars, would be very kind of a letdown to find out, right?
Well, I don't know. I mean, if it is megafauna, that would be amazing. If you find a living mammoth, if you found megafauna.
Mega, yeah. But, if it looks more like a wombat, you're kind of going, I don't know, I spent a lot of money for this. So.
Yeah, I think because a lot of the stories, they say creatures often seen also, mixing, walking on bipedally with walking on fours as well. There's been reports of they've seen it walking on fours, then snatches an animal, then goes on all fours, then snatches an animal, then goes on twos again and runs away. So so there's a lot of kind of conflicting reports. Is it bipedal? What does the track actually look like? Does it have 4 toes? Does it have 5 toes? So there's lots of information is actually lacking. There's a lot of stories, a lot of anecdotal stories, people seeing this thing crossing the road, but otherwise there's not much there. Yeah. Well, but I mean, like I said, it's an amazing country, and I would love to go back. I mean, if you could get that location where this man encountered these aggressive yowies, I'd be probably.
I will touch base with him. He's on my Facebook. I will touch base with him. It's been a long time since I've talked to him. He's a really good guy. I mean, when I spoke to him back then, those years ago for SC, I mean, that changed his whole perspective on everything. So, I will get in touch with him for you. And does he have any sound recordings or video recordings of the incidents? I don't recall. I'm not going to assume that I recall, but I do remember I remember the balloons. He would tie, and I'm not going to act like, I even remember why he did this, but I remember he took pictures he went back to the very camp it happened, and he would tie balloons around the camp, and I forget what the purpose was for. I apologize, but I'll get all that information for you. But he took pictures, and he kept going back there. Like anytime he had time off, he would go back out there. So I'm going, he saw something, because it's consuming his life, you know?
Right, I can imagine that. Yeah, if you encounter something like organic, I saw something back in 2011, and I'm going back regularly.
Right.
Because of that, and also the fact that there's like lots of recent stories coming all the time. Each time I go, there's a kind of new sighting. Now with the recent stories of this Malay Sumatran Bigfoot, I'm more enticed to go there.
See, so with what happened with you thinking, oh, it's a bear, I'm not going to scramble for my camera. Doesn't that make you kind of be a little bit more on par with the people that, they're like, well, there was a Bigfoot, it was standing there, I didn't even think to grab my camera, or if maybe they weren't sure it was a Bigfoot, I always say, you know what, I think that the grabbing my damn camera or my phone might be like 10th down on my list. But, beyond like, what the hell is that? What the hell is that? What the hell is that? And then you're kind of going, am I safe? Where can I run? And there's all these other things before grab your camera.
Right. And since that incident back in 2011, I'm kind of training to automatically go for my camera.
Are you? Yeah.
Yeah. So, even before you trek, you have the backpack at home, and you just practice you practice kind of pulling out the camera as fast as you can, or mounting it in a proper place where you can get it quickly rather than having it in the back of your backpack, right? Or having it in a couple of different protective cases rather than just having it in one case, or even having it just hanging out there. So I kind of do, because I kind of understand the situation. It's happened to me, and it's like, okay, I need to be alert now. I need to have that camera there,
right?
Or at least either a camera, and I need to be pulling it out quickly. So I kind of do actually practice that, just have the motion of pulling out the camera, getting on the knees, or actually,
studying
having
it.
some kind of
yeah.
I've actually, I bought all these kind of gears and gadgets for cameras, like these handles you can hold on to, and or you can actually mount them to your trekking pole, stuff like that. So I've kind of been thinking about that, kind of the technical aspects of how to deal with a situation like that.
That's really smart, though. It's just muscle memory, right? Like just like a police officer with his weapon. The more he draws it, and the quicker he is, it's just muscle memory. That's it. So, but I think that if you're in that shocked state, right, of course, the adrenaline's going. But okay, so here's just to swing back to that really quickly before we wrap up. Had you pulled your camera at the perfect time, what might you have gotten on said camera?
Well, on that incident, it would have been possibly just the back of just basically what we saw was something moving. It was probably moving on all fours, just the back of it.
Okay.
So there were two possible theories. It could have been a sun bear, or maybe it was an orang-pendek mimicking a sun bear.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right. So how animals mimic other animals and other things, right?
Yeah.
What we saw was just this black, kind of like a hump.
Oh.
Okay. So basically, that's what I just saw. Kind of a little. What was it? Yeah, just a small black hump, kind of moving slowly. Well, it was just kind of moving back and forth in the jungle in this gully, and that's what I saw. So there was no face, there was nothing, but in terms of actual evidence, I think the best evidence I have is that photo I took on a plantation a couple of years ago, which I think you might have seen.
Was that during our first talk? Yeah. Okay.
Right. So for me, that's the most intriguing evidence that I think I've come up with. That I refer to as the Hantu Tirau. Now, Tirau is the name of orang-pendek in that region. Okay, and once again, it's a name you will not find in any of the books. I don't know why, because it's in the Lake of Seven Peaks region area, and that photo was taken on not far from there on a plantation in the infamous raw Bento swamp forest. So for me, that's kind of the most intriguing,
Why am I not remembering this photo? What is in the photo? I feel silly. I don't remember this.
Yeah, it's a shadow creature, similar to something like you experienced. You told me many years ago.
Oh my gosh! Yes, I do remember this now. Of course, yes.
Right, and I've been pondering what is that for a couple of years now. Like, what is that? And that video gets more views than any other video for some reason.
Yeah.
It's just something black. There's no eye shine.
Right.
Okay, because most have eye shine at night. You can't really see even the outline of the creature, and it actually is something because it actually jumped on a stick. So, yeah, that's probably the strongest, kind of the most, kind of the strongest evidence I have. But then again, if I think what it is, it's not a real animal.
Right, you're like, what is it though?
Yeah, there's just there's no outline to it. There's no arms or legs. It's kind of like just shadow. There's something that looks like a little tail on it.
Yes.
So yeah. So.
Oh.
And
I remember.
Like
now.
I said, in that area, they call the orang pendek hantu tirau, and hantu means ghost or spirit. Okay. So yeah, but I'm hoping to get more footage in the near future. We'll see.
Well, maybe we can go up to Mount Shasta or something closer, or even Vietnam one day. I mean, that's amazing. I've never heard of anyone say a rock ape might be 10 feet tall. That is amazing to me.
I'm pretty sure that's what they are. I mean, in some ways, even in Arizona. So you're in Nevada, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's something in the south. Is it the Joshua Tree National Park in the south of Nevada?
Yucca Man. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was reading about that. Have you investigated that? Have you heard anybody or any recent news
little
about
bit.
that?
I mean, I don't remember the last time I saw a report that I was like, oh, that's a really recent report. I would drive out there, straight away, because that's amazing, because they are also quite tall and elusive, just like the Bigfoot, Pacific Northwest, or anything else. But I haven't come across anything, at least lately, unless I'm not looking in the right place, that has said, oh yes, it's the desert Bigfoot, aka the Yucca Man.
Right. And what about the Sierra Nevada region? There's supposed to be reports out of that area as well.
Well, yeah,
north of Reno, right?
Yeah, that's a busier place. Then you're getting into actual forest, and then okay, they have places to hide and things to eat and water sources, but out here, in the desert, I mean, Joshua Tree, it's so sparse out there, it seems. So it's not impossible. I'm not saying at all, but at the very least, maybe a little bit slightly plausible and possible. Right.
Unless it's some kind of a paranormal creature, then.
It makes you wonder.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think there was a photograph taken of a Yucca Man at one point, but it was so blurry that it kind of made you think that someone almost photoshopped it in and just did the blur in some kind of an airbrush mode in Photoshop or something. I mean, anybody can do that.
Well, that's the whole thing now, isn't it? With this Photoshop,
it's so tiresome.
You make it look convincing. Yeah. So that's the problem, I guess, nowadays, is that what we really need is you need a combination, you need a track, you need some kind of convincing. And the most important thing now is the DNA.
Exactly, and even the eDNA, like you said. I mean, if we could even have that would be a huge portion of this.
Right, because tracks aren't going to solve the problem. We had tracks since the late 50s. Even some kind of video. I mean, we've had this Patterson video since '67, and that's still people are still debating that today.
Do you think we need a body? Do we need an entire body?
We just need either some kind of a track with some hair, which will be analyzed by a proper organization. That's all we need.
Dan, I would love for you to take a listen to I don't remember what episode it was. I can send it to you in email when we get off. The owl moon prints up in Oregon.
Okay.
He's got a whole video documenting when they were driving in a truck, in a car, whatever, and he just noticed a couple of odd prints in the dirt going up this embankment, and they pulled over, and it looks to be a couple of actual knee prints, but they found hair in it. So I would love for you to take a look at that and just see what you think.
Yeah, definitely. I think everybody now is researching any type of hominid. They need to be looking for hair samples.
Yes.
Okay, I think the tracks, making casts now is secondary. You just photograph the cast, put a ruler there, but try to get the hair samples. I know they're pretty expensive to get analyzed, around $2,000. But if you're a couple of buddies, that's not that much money, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you have a bunch of people to chip in, it might be worth it because it comes back unknown. Of course, you know what? There has been samples that come back unknown, and then it seems like it just stops there and nobody really talks about it, which is really strange.
Right, and there's a book written by Professor Sykes where he talks about the fact that just because it's unknown doesn't mean it has to be a Bigfoot.
Right,
and that was a big part of his book, claiming that apparently somewhere up in Washington State, there's a government testing center. They test for like endangered species when they're being brought in. Like animals or hides or from endangered animals, like whatever, handbags or whatever, and they actually test for that. But apparently they stopped doing tests they stopped taking samples from cryptozoologists because they had problems with them.
Oh, like problems, like in quotation marks, or to where it's kind of questionable.
Like because just because something comes as unidentified doesn't mean it's automatically a Bigfoot.
Oh, because the researcher is going, I want you to tell me it's a Bigfoot.
Yeah, exactly. And so they apparently, at least that was the way it was written up in the book, that they were, in the beginning, they were accepting samples. I don't think they were even charging much. But now it's like, okay, we don't want to, because there's going to be like.
They're inundated.
Yeah. Right. Yeah,
I could see that.
But to my understanding, it's around $2,000 to get it properly tested. What I'm suggesting is I think if you do have a sample, just send it to the UK, to Professor Sykes. I'm not sure if his project is still on or if it's off. He was the one kind of initiated this whole kind of Bigfoot DNA stuff about 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah.
At Oxford University. He still might be accepting stuff. I don't know. So, if you did have something, hopefully you'll have a couple extra samples, you can send one off.
Well, it only takes one, right? To actually go, hey, we have something here.
Exactly. And now, to my understanding, the technology is so, before it used to be contaminated with just human, from your fingers. Right. But now they've been able to solve that whole problem. So now basically, when I asked Professor Sykes, how should I store these samples if I do find them, you just put them in a Ziploc bag. That's it.
Oh.
No fancy I thought maybe I had to put them in alcohol or something like that, formaldehyde. He goes, no, just put them into a Ziploc bag.
What if you handle them with your fingers and you don't have gloves?
Well, that's the whole thing, is they've got this technology now that they can separate that.
They bypass that now.
Yeah, they can, yeah.
Oh.
So theoretically, if you're trekking, you should have some tweezers with you.
Right.
Okay, I always carry little tweezers with me, a couple of cents. I always carry like a little Ziploc or a couple of Ziploc bags and, a couple of tweezers, and you just kind of, in case there's something there, just put it in the bag. That's all you have to do.
Well, Dan, besides a possible trip to Australia, what might be next for you as far as expeditions?
Well, I was thinking possibly maybe Sumatra over the winter holidays. Okay, I'm looking at that. I'm also looking at this big expedition into Nepal next summer during the rainy season, which doesn't sound very appealing. There's going to be mudslides and rain and but you can get to really high altitudes and it's going to be quite warm. So that's a project I'm looking at, and I'm also considering going to the States, which I briefly mentioned in one of my emails, that I would find actually going over the States and possibly, maybe doing some kind of investigation there. If you knew people would be interested in kind of putting together, or maybe put together some kind of Into the Fray radio official expedition. That would be cool.
That would be amazing. We could do California, Sierra Nevadas, like you mentioned. We could do Oregon or go up to Pacific Northwest. Yeah,
I'm really keen on this, the Shasta area, Sierra Nevada.
I am too. I would like that because we could, it might tie into other things, which we've talked about before, and why not? Not that we're trying to tie in Bigfoot with anything, guys. We're just saying that it might be a couple different episodes, right?
Yeah. Like I said, I haven't been to the States for like 20 years.
Oh, really?
So, yeah. I haven't been to Canada for quite a long time. Yeah, I've been basically out in Asia for almost a decade now.
I didn't realize you've been out there that long. Wow.
Yeah. I do trips to Australia. My parents fly over here.
Okay.
I've been to Europe. I lived in Europe for many, many years. So I've been to Europe. I lived in Europe for many, many years. So it's like, I would imagine actually going to the States, but there has to be some kind of a cryptozoological connection.
Yes. Yes.
Just, I want to be actually going there. Okay, great. I'll do some sightseeing, some camping, but I still want to do something related to cryptids, even paranormal stuff. If there's some kind of weird stuff happening somewhere, Nevada, Arizona, California, why not go in there? I've got 4 trail camps. We set it up, stuff like that. So actually, I'm kind of considering doing, in the future, possibly some type of expeditions in the U.S. hopefully with you.
I think that would be great. I'm pretty sure we could get a decent little team together of people that I know and go into an active area. That should be quite easy.
That would be amazing. Yeah, and I mean, especially if you have experienced people who know what they're doing.
Yes.
Who they're serious about it. I've got trail cameras. I'm sure they probably have trail cameras. Possibly, if somebody's got infrared binoculars, I'm not sure if you have any of your friends have them.
I'm sure that some of them do.
Yeah.
I mean, some of these people actually live in these areas, so
right.
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt it.
Yeah, so that's all you actually need. You need basic some Ziploc bags, tweezers, a couple of trail cams, one night vision binoculars. All you actually really need.
Well, yeah, let's put the call out. I mean, I have people already in my head that I'm thinking of their names, but I won't say it out loud right now. But yes, let's put the call out. If anyone's in those areas and you have that equipment and you'd be interested, let me know. I'll kind of do the process of,
right.
just vetting people. Have to have the right
plus
people.
That would be great. Plus, I also have basically, my fixed dates for the next year and a half.
Okay.
Right.
Awesome.
So the school I work at is a boarding school. So the kids live on campus.
Uh-huh.
So the parents have to know exactly when they pick the kids up. So I kind of know almost for the next 2 years my
that must be amazing. I don't even know my next week.
Yeah. So that's,
I can figure it out, but I'm so jealous.
So I'm in a position now where I can almost plan a year and a half in advance. Okay, well, so yeah, I'm sure we could work something out, and I think we could take everything to a higher level.
Yes.
Get the team to going. We go into some areas which nobody has, where there's been reports, but nobody's actually, ventured in there for, any length of time. So there's lots, and in some ways, there's a lot of stuff happening in North America, specifically in that kind of Western U.S.,
yes.
Western Canada as well.
I would love to film, the process, the whole thing. I would love to just, have hours and hours and hours of footage. It would be a lot to go through, but it would be worth it.
Definitely.
Well, Dan, where can everybody find you? Go through your YouTube and any other, your website, any social media stuff that you have. Let everybody know where they can find you.
Well, basically, I'm not very active on social media. I do find it does take up a lot of my time. So I'm just kind of active on YouTube and occasionally my blog. The best way is just email me directly.
And what's your email address?
And I'll leave that with you. Maybe you could post that, or actually, maybe they could contact you. I don't know if that would be all right.
No, that's totally fine. I understand that completely. Believe me.
Yeah. You know how it is. You want people. Yeah, I would prefer people just maybe through you. They would contact me because, for example, I know when I was with Dali in the jungle, people were sending him on Facebook stuff.
Uh-huh.
We're in the middle of the jungle and people are sending him Facebook messages, and it's like, okay, this is not the time.
No.
To respond. Yeah. So in some ways, social media is great, but I kind of try to limit it. I find because a lot of times it can be a little bit obsessive.
It's very obsessive, and when you're doing things like we do, you find that sometimes you feel like you have to do it, which I certainly do at this point, to stay in touch with, possible people that want to come on the show and this and that. But I do fantasize about shutting down every single social media site that I have, but I can't do it. So it's nice to have that option, I'm sure. So yeah, of course, if anybody wants to contact Dan specifically about, what we've talked about, of course, let me know and I will pass it along to him because we're in contact pretty well. We always have been. So if anyone has a question for you, they can contact me.
Right. And especially about expeditions. If somebody wants to do something in Vietnam, if there's somebody keen, and if you know somebody who wants on Rock Ape, they can contact me. I could organize it for sure. Probably even join them. Somebody out in Australia wants to do something, no problem. And also, like I said, if we could do something in Nevada or California, that would be great as well.
Well, I've got a couple of homework things here, which I love. I will contact Jamie, and I will also, it'll go out, of course, with the episode, but I have a couple people in mind already that I think would be pretty cool to take on our little Mount Shasta expedition. So I think we should start planning that, honestly. Definitely. We need to do this. Like I said, I've got quite a bit of time available for expeditions, and I want to be actually in expeditions during my holidays for sure. Fantastic. Well, Dan, thanks for coming around a second time to End at the Fray. I appreciate that.
It was a pleasure. Shannon.
Thank you. All right, I'll talk to you soon, and we'll keep everybody updated also on the expedition. If we need to put any call outs for anybody, we'll let you know.
Great, and if you need any more photos or any more additional information, just email me, no problem.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Dan.
All right, take care, Shannon.
Well, I'm so-and-so. I was given this name by my parents. I've been to such and such a college. I've done these things in my profession. I produce a little biography. Buddha says, forget it. That's not true. That's some story. That's all gone. That's all past. I want to see the real you are now. Well, nobody knows who that is. Because we don't know ourselves except through listening to our echoes and consulting our memories. But then there's a real you, and that again leads us back to this question. Who are you? That is the real you. We shall see how they play with this exam by the koans to get you to come out of your shell and find out who you really are. says, when you settle down in the train to read your newspaper and so on, you are not the same person who a little while ago left the platform. If you think you are linking your moments up in a chain. And this is what binds you to the wheel of birth and death. But when you know that every moment in which you are is the only moment, this comes into Zen. A master will say to somebody, get up and walk across the room. And he comes back and he says, where are your footprints? They've gone. So where are you? Who are you? When we are asked who we are, we usually give a kind of recitation of a history.